At my sister's funeral, my husband held me and whispered, "She was the love of my life. Even gave me a son, something you never could." I stood there frozen. He had no idea I'd read their messages months ago. I just smiled, walked away, and started planning. I buried my sister that day. His turn would come soon enough. I felt his lips brush against my ear as we stood beside Mia's grave. Everyone around us was crying, but Patrick wasn't. His voice was calm, almost satisfied. "She was the love of my life. Even gave me a son, something you never could." My breath stopped. The funeral service continued around us, but I couldn't hear anything except those words echoing in my head. Patrick's arm tightened around my waist, and to everyone watching, we looked like a grieving couple supporting each other through loss. But I knew better now. I stared down at the wooden casket holding my sister's body. Mia was gone. She'd fought cancer for 8 months, and I'd been there through every treatment, every sleepless night, every moment of pain. I'd held her hand when the doctors delivered bad news. I'd watched her waste away until she was barely recognizable. And apparently I'd watched my husband fall in love with her. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing these stories of strength and truth. If you believe that women deserve justice and the courage to reclaim their power, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need to hear this. Now let's see how this unfolds. Little Gabriel was crying somewhere behind us. 18 months old, and he'd never see his mother again. Daniel bounced him gently, trying to calm him down. Poor Daniel. He thought he was Gabriel's father. He'd been taking care of Mia during her illness, helping with the baby, acting like a devoted partner. He had no idea he was raising another man's child. My husband's child. "I know this is hard," Patrick whispered, his performance perfect for anyone listening. "But I'm here for you." The irony made my stomach turn. He was here for me. After confessing he loved my dead sister. After admitting he'd fathered her child while I spent 5 years begging God for a baby of my own. I remembered the phone calls now. Late-night conversations Patrick claimed were about work. The way he'd started volunteering to run errands for Mia when she got pregnant. How he knew exactly which brand of diapers Gabriel preferred, which songs made him sleep. I thought he was being helpful. A good brother-in-law. "Casey." Patrick's voice pulled me back to the cemetery. "You're shaking." I was. My whole body was trembling, but not from grief anymore. Something else was building inside me. Something cold and calculating that I didn't recognize. "I'm fine," I managed to say. But I wasn't fine. I was remembering things. Like the text message I'd seen on Patrick's phone 3 months ago. Mia's name on the screen with words that made my heart race. "I can't wait to see you tonight." When I'd asked Patrick about it, he'd laughed. "She's lonely, Casey. Scared about being a single mom. I'm just being supportive." I'd believed him. I'd actually felt guilty for questioning it. Now I wondered how many other lies I'd swallowed without question. The pastor finished speaking. People started moving toward their cars, but I couldn't make my feet work. Gabriel's crying had stopped. When I turned around, I saw him nestled against Daniel's chest, sucking his thumb. Daniel's eyes were red with tears. He loved that baby. Really loved him. "We should go," Patrick said. "People will be coming to the house." The house. Mia's house, where she'd spent her final months. Where I'd cooked her meals and helped her bathe and read stories to Gabriel while she rested. Where Patrick had apparently been playing house with my sister while I worked late shifts at the hospital. "Yes," I said quietly. "Let's go." As we walked to the car, I caught Daniel's eye. He looked lost, like a man who'd just buried his whole world. I wanted to warn him somehow. Tell him that everything he thought he knew was wrong. But what could I say? That my husband was probably Gabriel's real father? That my sister had been living a lie? "Take care of Gabriel," I said instead, touching Daniel's arm gently. He nodded, tears spilling down his cheeks. "Always." The drive home was torture. Patrick talked about the service, about how beautiful Mia had looked, about how many people had come to pay their respects. His voice was steady, normal. Like he hadn't just confessed to having an affair with my dying sister. I made appropriate sounds of agreement while my mind raced. When had it started? How long had they been together? Did Mia love him back, or was she just lonely and scared like Patrick claimed? The worst part was not knowing if my sister had been a victim or a willing participant in destroying my marriage. We pulled into our driveway and I stared at the house we'd bought together. The house where we'd planned to raise our own children someday. The house where I'd cried over negative pregnancy tests while Patrick held me and promised everything would be okay. Had he been thinking of Mia during those moments? Comparing my broken body to her fertile one? Ready to face everyone? Patrick asked, turning off the engine. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I'd married 7 years ago. The man I'd trusted with my heart, my future, my dreams of motherhood. The man who'd just admitted to fathering a child with my sister while I remained heartbroken and empty. He had no idea that I'd seen those text messages months ago. No idea that I'd been suspicious but too afraid to dig deeper. No idea that his whispered confession had just confirmed my worst fears and lit something dark inside me. Ready, I said and smiled. As I was ready. Not for the reception or the casseroles or the well-meaning condolences from family friends. I was ready for something else entirely. Patrick thought his secret was safe. He thought he could whisper his truth at my sister's grave and I'd be too shocked, too grief-stricken to process it. He was wrong. As we walked toward the house, I began planning. Not the wild schemes of a heartbroken woman, but the careful, methodical planning of someone who'd learned patience from 5 years of disappointment. Patrick had taken my sister. He thought he'd taken my peace. Now I was going to take everything from him. The house felt different when we got home from the cemetery. Filled with Mia's friends and co-workers, all speaking in hushed tones and offering sympathy casseroles. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, accepting hugs and murmured condolences while my mind worked on a completely different level. Gabriel was there too, still with Daniel. The man looked exhausted, probably hadn't slept properly in weeks. I watched Patrick approach them, saw how his eyes lingered on the baby with something that looked almost possessive. When Gabriel reached tiny arms toward Patrick, I felt sick. He remembers you, Daniel said gratefully. Thank you for helping so much these past months. Patrick's smile was warm, practiced. Of course. Mia was family. Family. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. After everyone left, I helped clean up while Patrick put leftover food in the refrigerator. Normal domestic tasks that felt surreal after what I'd learned. When he suggested we stay the night at Mia's house instead of driving home, I agreed. Someone needed to start going through her belongings, he said. It would be easier to start tomorrow morning. I knew he had other reasons for wanting to stay. That night, I lay awake listening to Patrick's steady breathing beside me in Mia's guest room. The same room where he'd probably spent countless nights while I worked late shifts at the hospital. The same bed where my sister had made decisions that destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. When morning came, Patrick left early to handle some urgent work matter. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then I got to work. Mia's bathroom still smelled like her lavender shampoo. Her toothbrush sat in the holder next to a smaller one that must have been Gabriel's. I carefully wrapped both in tissue paper and placed them in separate plastic bags. From her dresser, I collected strands of dark hair from her old brush. Each item went into labeled bags with dates and times written in my neat handwriting. The hardest part was getting Patrick's DNA sample. When he came home that evening, I waited until he showered. His razor sat on the bathroom counter, still damp. I wrapped it carefully in a clean towel and added it to my collection. 3 days later, I drove 2 towns over to a private lab. The technician was professional and discreet. No questions asked beyond the necessary paperwork. I paid in cash and gave a fake name. The results would be ready in a week. Playing the perfect wife became my full-time performance. I cooked Patrick's favorite meals and listened to his stories about work. When he talked about missing Mia, I held his hand and offered comfort. When he mentioned how hard it must be for Daniel to raise Gabriel alone, I suggested we should offer more help. Maybe we could babysit sometimes, I said over dinner. Give Daniel a break. Patrick's fork paused halfway to his mouth. That's thoughtful of you. But Daniel seems to have things handled. Still, Gabriel is practically family. And children need stability during times like this. Something flickered across Patrick's face. Interest. Calculation. You're right. We should definitely stay involved in his life. Every conversation felt like a chess match now. Patrick thought he was playing against a grieving woman who suspected nothing. He had no idea I was already 3 moves ahead. While waiting for the DNA results, I decided to visit Mia's lawyer. Robert Chin had handled our family's legal matters for years. I made an appointment under the pretense of settling Mia's affairs. I'm trying to organize everything for Gabriel's future, I explained, sitting across from his mahogany desk. I want to make sure I understand what my sister left behind. Robert pulled out a thick file. Mia was very thorough with her estate planning, especially after Gabriel was born. He walked me through everything. The house was paid off and would go to Gabriel when he turned 18. There was a substantial life insurance policy. But the surprise was the family trust. Your grandmother's land holdings, Robert explained. Mia inherited them when your parents died. Very valuable property now with all the development happening in that area. It's all tied up in a trust for Gabriel. My stomach dropped. How valuable? Conservative estimate? Around $2 million. Could be more in a few years. $2 million. No wonder Patrick had been so interested in helping with Gabriel. No wonder he'd whispered those words at the funeral. This wasn't just about love or betrayal. This was about money. What happens if something were to occur to Daniel? I asked carefully. Robert adjusted his glasses. Well, Daniel isn't listed as Gabriel's legal father on any documents. Mia never established paternity officially. So if something happened to him, the court would need to determine Gabriel's next legal guardian. And who would that be? Family members would have the strongest claim. You, for instance, as Gabriel's aunt. Or, he paused, checking his notes. Anyone who could prove biological relation to the child. I left Robert's office with my hands shaking. The pieces were falling into place and the picture they formed was uglier than I'd imagined. Patrick hadn't just betrayed our marriage. He'd calculated the whole thing. Found a way to access millions of dollars through a child he believed was his son. The DNA results arrived on a Wednesday. Patrick was upstairs giving Gabriel a bath while Daniel ran errands. I sat at Mia's kitchen table and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. The scientific language was complex, but the conclusion was clear. Patrick was not Gabriel's biological father. Not even close. I read the results 3 times before the implications sank in. Patrick had been so certain. So confident in his whispered confession at the cemetery. But he was wrong. Which meant everything else might be wrong too. I thought about Daniel's devotion to Gabriel. The way he held the baby like his own flesh and blood. The grief in his eyes at the funeral. What if Daniel really was Gabriel's father? What if Mia had lied to Patrick, let him believe Gabriel was his while protecting the real father? My sister was more cunning than I'd given her credit for. I folded the DNA results carefully and tucked them into my purse. Upstairs, I could hear Patrick's voice as he read Gabriel a bedtime story. The same gentle tone he'd used with me during our years of trying to conceive. The same voice that had whispered poison at my sister's grave. When Patrick came downstairs, I was washing dishes at the sink. He's finally asleep, Patrick said, wrapping his arms around me from behind. Daniel should be back soon. I leaned against him, playing my part. He's lucky to have you helping so much. Gabriel needs stability. Male figures in his life. Patrick's voice carried that possessive tone again. I've been thinking we should petition for partial custody. Help Daniel with the financial burden. There was. His real plan laid bare. That's very generous, I said softly. Patrick kissed my neck. I just want what's best for the boy. I smiled, still facing away so he couldn't see my expression. As now I knew the truth. Patrick wasn't Gabriel's father. His entire scheme was built on a lie. And I was the only person in the world who knew it. The question was, what was I going to do with that knowledge? For 2 weeks I carried the DNA results like a loaded weapon. Every morning when Patrick kissed me goodbye, every evening when he asked about my day, every night when he held me close in bed, I felt those papers burning in my purse. The truth was mine now and I was going to choose exactly when and how to use it. Daniel had been coming by more often since the funeral. Sweet, grieving Daniel who had no idea he was Gabriel's real father. I watched him during those visits, studied the way his face lit up when Gabriel laughed, how naturally he soothed the toddler's tears. Love radiated from every gesture, every word. Meanwhile, Patrick continued his performance as the caring family friend. He brought expensive toys for Gabriel, talked about college funds and future planning. Each act of fake generosity made my stomach turn. Daniel seems overwhelmed, Patrick mentioned one evening as we drove home. Maybe we should offer to take Gabriel for weekends. Give him some space to grieve properly. Kept my voice level. That's thoughtful of you. The boy needs stability. Structure. Patrick's hands tightened on the steering wheel. I've been thinking about what Mia would have wanted. What Mia would have wanted. The irony was breathtaking. That night I made my decision. I was going to tell Daniel the truth, but I needed to be careful. This wasn't just about revealing Patrick's lies anymore. This was about giving a father his son back. I called Daniel the next morning while Patrick was at work. My hands shook as I dialed his number. Daniel, it's Casey. Could we meet for coffee? There's something important I need to discuss with you. He sounded surprised but agreed. We met at a small cafe 2 towns over, far from anyone who might recognize us. Daniel looked tired, older than his 35 years. Grief had carved new lines around his eyes. Is everything okay? He asked, settling into the booth across from me. I pulled the DNA results from my purse and placed them on the table between us. I need to show you something. But first, I need you to tell me about your relationship with Mia. Daniel's face went red. We weren't. She was sick and I was just helping. Daniel. I reached across and touched his hand. I'm not judging you. I need to know the truth. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I loved her. I know that sounds terrible, with her being married to someone else's memory and sick and everything, but I couldn't help it. She was so brave, so strong even while she was dying. Tears started flowing down his cheeks. We were together for about 6 months before Gabriel was born. Then she got scared, said it was too complicated, that people would think she was just using me for help with the baby. My heart ached for him. Did she ever tell you who Gabriel's father was? She said it was someone from before, someone who couldn't be in the picture. I never pushed for details because it seemed to upset her. He wiped his eyes with his sleeve. But I loved Gabriel from the moment I met him. It didn't matter to me who his biological father was. I pushed the DNA results toward him. It should matter to you now. Daniel's hands trembled as he read the report. I watched his face change as the words sank in. Confusion, then hope, then pure joy mixed with heartbreak. He's mine. Daniel whispered. He's yours. Daniel broke down then, sobbing right there in the coffee shop. Other customers stared, but I didn't care. I was watching a man discover he had a son, and it was beautiful and devastating at the same time. Why didn't she tell me? He asked when he could speak again. I thought about my sister, dying and scared and carrying so many secrets. Maybe she was protecting you. Or maybe she was protecting Gabriel. I don't know, Daniel. But what matters now is that you know. We talked for 2 more hours. I told him about Patrick's confession at the funeral, about the inheritance, about everything I'd discovered. Daniel listened with growing anger and disbelief. So he was planning to use Gabriel to access Mia's estate? That's exactly what he was planning. Daniel's jaw tightened. What do we do now? I'd been thinking about that question for days. Gabriel's 2nd birthday is next month. I think it's time everyone knew the truth. Planning Gabriel's birthday party became my new obsession. I spent hours creating the guest list, making sure every important person in our lives would be there. Patrick's business partners, our neighbors, family friends, even Pastor Williams, who had officiated Mia's funeral. Patrick was thrilled that I was taking charge of the celebration. You're amazing, Casey. Mia would be so proud of how you're stepping up for Gabriel. Every compliment felt like acid in my veins. I ordered custom invitations with Gabriel's baby photo on the front. Inside I wrote, "Join us as Gabriel turns 2. A celebration of truth, family, and new beginnings." Patrick never asked to see the final wording. The decorations were simple but elegant. Blue and white balloons, a train-themed cake, toys scattered around Mia's living room. Daniel helped with the setup, his hands shaking with nervous energy. "Are you sure about this?" he asked as we hung streamers. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The guests started arriving at 2 o'clock. Gabriel was in his best outfit, a little blue suit that made him look impossibly grown up. He ran around the room, accepting hugs and presents with toddler enthusiasm. Patrick worked the room like a politician, accepting congratulations on his devotion to Gabriel and Daniel. I heard him tell Mrs. Henderson from next door how important it was to provide male guidance for the boy. "Children need father figures," he said, bouncing Gabriel on his knee. "Especially boys." The cake cutting was scheduled for 3:30. At 3:25 I stood up and called for everyone's attention. Before we celebrate Gabriel's special day, I have something to share with all of you. I smiled at the room full of expectant faces. It's about family and truth and making sure Gabriel grows up knowing exactly who he belongs to. I walked to a table near the kitchen and picked up a stack of white envelopes I'd prepared that morning. Each one was labeled with a guest's name in my careful handwriting. I've put together some information that I think you'll all find very interesting, I said, beginning to distribute the envelopes. Please open them now. The room fell silent as people tore open their envelopes. Inside each one was a copy of the DNA test results, along with printed screenshots of text messages I'd found on Patrick's phone, photos of him visiting Mia during her illness, and a detailed timeline of his lies. I watched the faces change as people read. Confusion turned to shock, turned to disgust. Whispers started, then grew louder. Patrick's face went white as snow. Casey, what is this? I walked over to where Daniel stood holding Gabriel, both of them looking uncertain about what was happening. This, I said, taking Gabriel's small hand in mine, is the truth. Patrick, you told me at my sister's grave that she gave you a son. You were wrong. I turned to face the room full of stunned guests. Everyone, I'd like you to meet Gabriel's real father. Daniel Morrison. The man who loved my sister, who held her hand through chemotherapy, who has been raising his son without even knowing Gabriel was his. The silence was deafening. Then Gabriel, oblivious to the adult drama swirling around him, reached up and patted Daniel's face with his tiny palm. Did I? He said clearly. And Daniel, tears streaming down his face, kissed his son's forehead and whispered, Yes, buddy. I'm your dada. The room exploded after Gabriel called Daniel, dada. Voices rose in anger and confusion. Mrs. Henderson clutched her pearls and stared at Patrick like he'd grown horns. Pastor Williams looked between the DNA results and Patrick with undisguised disgust. But Patrick went on the attack. This is insane, he shouted, waving the papers in the air. Casey's lost her mind with grief. These documents are fake. Daniel probably paid someone to forge them. Several guests backed away from him, but Patrick wasn't finished. He pointed an accusing finger at Daniel, who was still holding Gabriel protectively. You think I don't see what's happening here? You want Gabriel's inheritance for yourself. So you seduce my grieving wife into believing these lies. Daniel's face flushed red. Patrick, stop. You're scaring Gabriel. I'm scaring him? You're the one trying to steal a child from his family. I watched Patrick unravel with fascination. This was the real man behind the mask. Entitled, vicious, willing to destroy anyone who threatened his plans. The room full of witnesses was seeing him for what he truly was. Enough, I said quietly, but somehow my voice cut through the chaos. Everyone please. Gabriel doesn't need to see this. Daniel immediately moved toward the door with Gabriel, several guests following them outside. The remaining people stared at Patrick and me like we were actors in some twisted play. Patrick, I said, my voice steady as stone. We need to talk. Privately. After the last guest left, the house felt hollow. Patrick paced the living room like a caged animal while I cleaned up birthday decorations with methodical calm. How could you do this to me? He demanded. Humiliate me in front of everyone? Make me look like some kind of monster. I folded a tablecloth with careful precision. I didn't make you anything, Patrick. I just showed people who you really are. Those tests are fake. They have to be. Call the lab yourself. Ask for verification. I met his eyes steadily. But we both know what they'll tell you. Patrick's face crumpled then, the fight going out of him. He sank onto the couch and put his head in his hands. I thought he was mine, he whispered. All this time I thought. You thought you'd hit the jackpot, I said. A secret son and a $2 million inheritance. Must have felt like winning the lottery. He looked up sharply. It wasn't about money. Wasn't it? I sat across from him, studying his face. When did you first learn about the family trust, Patrick? Before or after you started sleeping with my sister? The question hung in the air between us. Patrick's silence was answer enough. I loved her, he finally said. I really did love Mia. Maybe you did. But you loved what she could give you more. Over the following weeks, Patrick tried to salvage his reputation. He called mutual friends, explaining his side of the story. He hired a lawyer to challenge the DNA results. He even attempted to file for visitation rights, claiming he'd formed a parental bond with Gabriel during Mia's illness. But the damage was done. Word spread quickly through our small community. Patrick's construction business started losing clients. The bank called about our mortgage payments. Friends stopped returning his calls. Meanwhile, I was busy with my own projects. I'd been thinking about Alan Morrison for months. Not Daniel, his last name was just coincidence, but Alan Morrison, Patrick's former business partner. 3 years ago, Patrick had convinced Alan to invest in a hotel renovation project. When the deal went south, Patrick had protected his own interests while Alan lost his life savings. Alan was working construction now, barely making ends meet. His wife had left him, taking their daughter. He'd lost his house, his dignity, everything. And he blamed Patrick for all of it. I found Alan at a job site on the other side of town. He was installing drywall, his hands rough and scarred from manual labor. When I introduced myself as Patrick's wife, his face hardened. "What do you want?" he asked, not stopping his work. "I want to help you get back what Patrick stole from you." That got his attention. Alan set down his tools and looked at me properly for the first time. "Patrick didn't steal anything. He just made sure he got paid while I got nothing. I know about the resort deal, Alan. I know how he altered the contracts after you'd already signed. I know about the offshore account he used to hide profits." Alan's eyes widened. "How do you know about that?" "Because I've been married to him for 7 years. I know all his tricks." We talked for 2 hours in that half-finished building. Alan told me everything. How Patrick had manipulated the partnership agreement, how he'd used insider information to secure the best properties for himself, how he'd systematically destroyed Alan's reputation in the industry. "I tried to expose him," Alan said bitterly. "But Patrick's lawyers were better than mine. Better funded, anyway. What if I told you I had evidence? Documents that could prove fraud?" Alan laughed harshly. "You'd do that to your own husband?" "My husband confessed to having an affair with my dying sister. My husband tried to steal a child's inheritance. My husband is not the man I married." I met Alan's eyes steadily. "He destroyed your life. He destroyed mine. Maybe it's time we return the favor." The plan we crafted was elegant in its simplicity. Alan still had emails from the hotel deal, correspondence that showed Patrick's deceptive practices. I provided bank records I'd copied from Patrick's files, documents that revealed the hidden payments and altered contracts. But we needed something more recent, something that would connect Patrick's past fraud to current criminal activity. That's when I remembered Mia's bank account. During her illness, I'd helped Mia manage her finances. She'd given me power of attorney when the treatments made her too sick to handle paperwork. I knew Patrick had convinced her to let him help with some transactions. At the time, I thought he was being supportive. Now I realized he'd been skimming money from her medical expense account. Small amounts, spread over months, probably hoping no one would notice after she died. But I'd kept detailed records. I had copies of every bank statement, every transaction. Alan and I spent weeks building our case. We created a timeline that showed Patrick's pattern of financial manipulation spanning 3 years. We gathered witness statements from other business partners he'd cheated. We even found evidence that he'd been inflating insurance claims on his construction projects. When we felt ready, Alan contacted a detective he knew from his old neighborhood. Detective Rodriguez was familiar with financial fraud cases and eager to investigate someone with Patrick's reputation. The timing had to be perfect. I wanted Patrick to feel secure, confident that the birthday party disaster was behind him. So I played the role of reconciling wife. I cooked his favorite meals, listened to his complaints about unfair treatment, even suggested we take a weekend trip to work on our marriage. Patrick was pathetically grateful for what he thought was forgiveness. He booked us a cabin in the mountains for our wedding anniversary weekend. The same date we'd gotten married 7 years ago, full of hope and love and dreams that now seemed like they belonged to different people. I packed carefully for the trip. Lingerie to maintain the illusion. My laptop to finalize the evidence package. And a bottle of champagne to celebrate when it was all over. "This is exactly what we need," Patrick said as we drove toward the mountains. "Time away from all the drama, just the two of us." "Just the two of us," I agreed, watching the familiar landscape blur past the car window. He had no idea that while he was looking forward to our romantic weekend, Detective Rodriguez was preparing search warrants. By the time we returned home on Sunday, Patrick's carefully constructed world would be nothing but rubble. The cabin was beautiful, exactly the kind of place we would have loved during our early marriage. Patrick opened the champagne and made a toast to new beginnings. We clinked glasses and I smiled like a woman in love. To us, he said. To getting exactly what we deserve, I replied. He thought I was talking about happiness. I was talking about justice. The champagne turned bitter in my mouth as I watched Patrick sleep that Sunday morning. Our anniversary weekend had been perfect from his perspective. Romantic dinners, long walks, intimate conversations about rebuilding our marriage. He'd even talked about trying for children again, now that the Gabriel situation was resolved. I checked my phone while he dozed. 3 missed calls from Detective Rodriguez. It was happening. We should head back early, I said, gently shaking Patrick awake. I have a headache and I'd rather recover at home. He was disappointed but understanding. Always so considerate when he thought he was winning. The drive home felt longer than usual. Patrick hummed along to the radio, his hand resting on my thigh. He talked about plans for renovating our kitchen, maybe taking a real vacation this summer. His mood was lighter than I'd seen it in months. We pulled into our driveway at 2:30 in the afternoon. There were 3 police cars waiting. Patrick's humming stopped abruptly. What the hell? Detective Rodriguez approached as we got out of the car. He was a compact man with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Behind him stood 2 uniformed officers and a woman I didn't recognize. Patrick Morrison? I'm Detective Rodriguez. We have a warrant for your arrest. The color drained from Patrick's face. For what? This is insane. Casey, tell them this is a mistake. But I was already walking toward the house, leaving him standing in the driveway as the detective read him his rights. Fraud. Embezzlement. Wire fraud. Money laundering. The charges seemed to go on forever. Casey. Patrick's voice cracked as they put handcuffs on him. Casey, call my lawyer. This is all a misunderstanding. I turned at the front door and looked back at him one last time. I'll call someone, I said quietly. I called Alan Morrison instead. The house felt different after Patrick was gone. Quieter but not in a peaceful way. More like the silence after a storm, when you're assessing the damage and wondering what comes next. The media attention started immediately. By Monday morning, reporters were camped outside our house. Patrick's construction company made the local news, then the regional papers, then somehow went viral on social media. Local businessman arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. The story had everything: betrayal, stolen money, a secret affair with his wife's dying sister. I unplugged the landline and stopped checking social media. The neighbors stared when I went to get my mail. Former friends crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. I became the wife of the con man, the woman who'd either been incredibly naive or secretly complicit. Most people assumed I was a victim. They were half right. Patrick's lawyer called Tuesday afternoon. A slick man named Harrison who spoke in careful legal phrases and seemed more concerned about his fee than his client's innocence. Mrs. Morrison, your husband's accounts have been frozen pending investigation. I'm afraid that includes joint accounts and assets held in both your names. I understand. He's asked me to request that you post bail. The amount is substantial, but if you could mortgage the house. No. Harrison paused. I'm sorry. I said no. Patrick can find another way to make bail. Mrs. Morrison, I think you should know that the prosecution has substantial evidence. Financial records, email correspondence, witness testimony. This isn't going away. Good, I said and hung up. Patrick tried calling from jail that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Then I deleted the message without listening to it. I spent the next few weeks methodically erasing Patrick from our shared life. I changed the locks first, then opened new bank accounts in my name only. I called his employer and his business partners, playing the role of the shocked wife discovering her husband's crimes. I had no idea, I told anyone who would listen. I trusted him completely. I feel so betrayed. It wasn't entirely a lie. The house began to feel like mine again. I moved Patrick's clothes to the garage, then donated them to charity. I repainted the bedroom walls from the beige he'd preferred to a soft lavender that reminded me of Mia's old room. I bought new sheets, new curtains, new everything. Gabriel's pictures still hung in the hallway. Daniel had been bringing him by occasionally, tentative visits where we'd sit in the living room and I'd read stories or help with puzzles. Gabriel was thriving with Daniel, growing more confident and talkative every week. "Are you okay?" Daniel asked one afternoon as Gabriel napped on my couch. "This can't be easy for you." I looked at the sleeping toddler, his dark hair falling across his forehead just like Mia's used to. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Daniel didn't understand, but he didn't push. He was dealing with his own adjustment, suddenly becoming a single father to a child he'd only recently learned was his. But he was good at it. Natal. Gabriel adored him. Patrick's trial was set for 6 months away. His lawyer kept calling, wanting me to testify as a character witness. I told him I wouldn't be available. Instead, I focused on building something new. I enrolled in grief counseling, not for Patrick's loss but for Mia's. For the sister I'd loved and lost, for the marriage I'd believed in, for the naive woman I'd been before I learned what betrayal really meant. "Tell me about your anger," Dr. Martinez asked during one session. "I'm not angry anymore," I said, and realized it was true. I was furious for a while. But anger is exhausting. It burns through you and leaves nothing behind. What replaced it? I thought about that for a long moment. Purpose, I think. Clarity. The house where Mia had died became my refuge. I moved there permanently after the divorce papers were filed. Patrick could have our old house when he got out of prison, if he could still afford it after paying legal fees and restitution. Mia's house held better memories anyway. I set up an art studio in her old sewing room, started painting again for the first time in years. I planted a garden in the backyard where Gabriel could play when he visited. I turned Mia's bedroom into a guest room for Daniel and Gabriel when they stayed overnight. The reporters eventually moved on to newer scandals. The neighbors stopped staring. Life found a new rhythm, quieter but more honest than before. Patrick wrote letters from jail. Long, rambling things full of apologies and explanations and pleas for forgiveness. I read the first few, then started throwing them away unopened. What was the point? Nothing he could say would change what he'd done or undo the hurt he'd caused. The last letter I opened was different. Shorter. Just one line. "Why did you destroy me?" I sat with that question for hours, holding the paper in my hands. Then I folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with all the other things I was done with. Old wedding photos, love letters from our early years, the positive pregnancy test I'd saved from the one time we'd gotten our hopes up. I didn't destroy Patrick. Patrick destroyed himself. I just stopped protecting him from the consequences. Spring came early that year. I planted flowers in Mia's old garden boxes, choosing varieties that would bloom in succession from March through October. When Gabriel visited, he helped me water them with a tiny plastic watering can Daniel had bought him. "Flowers are pretty," Gabriel said one afternoon, his vocabulary expanding daily. "Yes, they are," I agreed, watching him carefully sprinkle water on the marigold seedlings. "And they grow back every year even after winter kills them." Gabriel nodded solemnly, as if this was the most important information he'd ever received. Then he ran off to chase a butterfly, leaving me alone with the garden and the gentle afternoon sun. Not all things buried stay dead, I thought. Some rise stronger. The butterfly Gabriel had been chasing landed on one of the marigold buds, its orange and black wings fluttering gently in the afternoon breeze. I watched it for a moment, thinking about transformations and second chances, before Gabriel's laughter drew my attention back to the present. "Aunt Casey, look." He pointed at a ladybug crawling across his tiny palm. "It's red." "It's beautiful," I said, kneeling beside him. At 3 years old now, Gabriel was becoming more like Mia every day, curious about everything, gentle with living creatures, quick to find wonder in small moments. Daniel appeared around the corner of the house, carrying grocery bags. "Sorry I took so long. The store was packed." He paused, watching Gabriel show me his ladybug. "He's been talking about the garden all week." "Has he?" I helped Gabriel carefully place the ladybug on a leaf. "Well, the flowers need a good gardener." These visits had become routine over the past year. Daniel would bring Gabriel every few weeks, and they'd stay for dinner or sometimes the whole weekend. It wasn't about replacing what we'd lost. Nothing could do that. It was about building something new from the pieces that remained. Patrick's trial had ended 4 months ago. Guilty on all counts. 7 years in federal prison plus restitution to his victims. The judge had been particularly harsh about his exploitation of Mia's illness, calling it unconscionable manipulation of a vulnerable woman. I hadn't attended the sentencing. I'd been here instead teaching Gabriel how to plant sunflower seeds. The seasons changed and so did I. I started volunteering at a women's shelter downtown, helping other women navigate the legal system when their partners betrayed them. Many of their stories echoed mine: financial manipulation, emotional abuse, the slow erosion of trust that happens so gradually you don't notice until it's too late. "How did you know?" asked Sarah, a young mother whose husband had been stealing from their joint accounts. "How did you figure out what he was really doing?" I handed her a tissue and considered the question. I stopped making excuses for him. I stopped assuming his explanations were true just because I wanted them to be. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I feel so stupid. All the signs were there." "You're not stupid. You're human. We want to believe the people we love are telling us the truth." These conversations became a form of healing I hadn't expected. Each woman I helped felt like a small victory against the Patrick Morrisons of the world. Each person who learned to trust their instincts again felt like justice growing in soil that had once been poisoned. Gabriel started preschool that fall. Daniel was nervous about leaving him, but Gabriel thrived. His teacher said he was particularly good at helping other children when they were sad or scared. "He has an unusual amount of empathy for someone his age," Ms. Rodriguez told Daniel during parent conferences. "It's like he understands that people can be hurting even when they don't show it." Daniel shared this with me over dinner one evening and I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Gabriel would never remember Mia, but somehow he carried pieces of her kindness with him. "Do you think he'll want to know about her someday?" Daniel asked. "About what really happened?" I set down my fork and considered the question. "I think he'll want to know that his mother loved him enough to protect him, and that she made sure he ended up with the right father." The anniversary of Mia's death approached quietly. I'd been dreading it for weeks, unsure how to mark the day or what it should mean now that so much had changed. Then Gabriel solved the problem for me. "Can we visit Mama Mia?" he asked one afternoon, using the name he'd coined for my sister based on the stories we told him. "I want to show her my new drawing." Daniel looked at me questioningly. We'd never taken Gabriel to the cemetery before, unsure if he was old enough to understand. "What did you draw?" I asked Gabriel. He ran to get his artwork from the kitchen table, a colorful picture of 3 stick figures standing in front of a house. "That's me and Daddy and you," he explained, pointing to each figure. "And this is our house where we have dinner and plant flowers." The innocence of it broke my heart and mended it at the same time. In Gabriel's world, the 3 of us were simply family. No complicated history, no betrayal or loss, just the people who loved him and took care of him. "I think Mama Mia would love to see your drawing," I said. We went the next morning, a crisp October day with leaves crunching under our feet. Gabriel held both our hands as we walked through the cemetery, chattering about the different flowers and asking why some graves had angels while others had crosses. When we reached Mia's headstone, Gabriel became quiet. The marble was weathered now, softened by a year of seasons. Someone, probably our mother's sister who lived across the state, had left fresh flowers the week before. "Is she really under there?" Gabriel asked, his voice very small. "Her body is," Daniel said gently. "But the part of her that loved you, that's still here with us." Gabriel nodded solemnly and placed his drawing against the headstone, weighing it down with a small rock he'd collected on the walkover. Then he sat cross-legged in the grass and began talking to the stone as if Mia could hear him. "Hi, Mama Mia. I drew you a picture. Aunt Casey taught me how to make the sun yellow instead of orange. And Daddy says I'm getting really good at tying my shoes." I felt tears coming and didn't try to stop them. This was what Mia had wanted. Gabriel surrounded by love, protected from the ugliness that had shaped his earliest months. She'd made her choices, kept her secrets, and somehow orchestrated a future where her son would be safe and cherished. After a while, Gabriel stood up and walked over to me. "Aunt Casey, are you sad?" "A little," I admitted. "But not the bad kind of sad. The kind of sad that comes with loving someone very much." He considered this with the seriousness of a child trying to understand complex emotions. Then he hugged my legs tightly. "It's okay to be sad sometimes," he said, apparently quoting something Daniel had taught him. "Daddy says feelings are like weather, they change." We stayed a few more minutes, then walked back to the car. Gabriel fell asleep in his car seat on the drive home, still clutching a leaf he'd picked up near Mia's grave. That evening, after Daniel and Gabriel had gone home, I sat in my studio and started a new painting. Not of Mia this time, but of the garden we'd built together. The one where Gabriel played and learned and grew into the remarkable little person he was becoming. The painting took weeks to finish. Layer by layer, I built up colors that captured not just the visual beauty of the space, but the emotional weight of it. The hope and healing that had grown there. The way love could take root even in soil that had been tainted by betrayal. When it was done, I hung it in the living room where Gabriel could see it during his visits. He studied it seriously, pointing out details I'd included. The butterfly he'd chased, the ladybug that had crawled across his palm, the sunflowers that now stood taller than he was. "It looks like home," he said simply. And it was. Not the home I'd planned when I married Patrick, not the life I'd imagined when Mia was still alive and healthy. But home nonetheless, built from truth instead of lies, rooted in love instead of manipulation. People sometimes asked if I regretted exposing Patrick. If I thought I should have handled things differently, been more forgiving, found a way to work through our problems. The answer was always the same. Some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. Some lies are too destructive to overlook. Gabriel was living proof of that truth. In a world where Patrick had succeeded, Gabriel would have grown up believing lies about his father, his inheritance, his very identity. Instead, he was growing up surrounded by people who chose honesty even when it was painful. That seemed like justice to me. Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that grows slowly year by year, in the hearts of people who refuse to let betrayal have the final word. My name is Casey Walsh. I'm not a victim or a hero, just a woman who learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to participate in someone else's lies. And sometimes that's enough to change everything. If this story of calculated justice had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Casey handed out those white envelopes at Gabriel's birthday party, revealing the truth to everyone. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. For years ago, my sister stole my rich fiancé. At our father's funeral, she smirked, "Poor you, still single at 38. I got the man, the money, the mansion." I smiled. "Have you met my husband?" I called him over. Her smile vanished, her hands trembled. She recognized him instantly, and froze. "Poor you, still single at 38. I got the man, the money, and the mansion." My sister Vanessa's voice dripped with false sympathy as she leaned closer, her diamond earrings catching the soft lighting. Around us, mourners whispered their condolences and shared memories of our father, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs. She'd waited exactly 3 minutes after arriving to deliver the blow. 3 minutes of watching me stand alone beside Dad's casket. 3 minutes of calculating the perfect moment to strike when I was most vulnerable. Classic Vanessa, always knowing exactly when to twist the knife. "Look at you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper but somehow managing to echo in my ears like a shout. "Standing here all alone while everyone else has moved on with their lives. It's almost pathetic." Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories of resilience and transformation. If you believe that betrayal can lead to something beautiful, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more women who need hope. Now let's see how this unfolds. The funeral director's soft piano music seemed to fade into background noise as blood rushed to my cheeks. I could feel the heat of embarrassment creeping up my neck, the familiar burning sensation that had plagued me since childhood whenever Vanessa decided to remind me of my place in the world. She looked absolutely radiant in her grief, if you could call it that. Her black Chanel dress hugged her curves perfectly, her platinum blonde hair cascaded in professional waves that had probably taken hours to achieve. And her makeup was flawless despite the tears she'd been shedding for our father's business associates. Even her sorrow was designer perfect. "I mean really, Laura," she continued, adjusting the massive diamond bracelet on her wrist with deliberate slowness. "When was the last time you even went on a date? When was the last time a man looked at you and saw something worth having?" The questions hit like physical blows. When was the last time? I couldn't even remember. The years since her betrayal had blurred together in a haze of work, therapy sessions, and quiet evenings spent rebuilding myself from the ground up. I'd been so focused on healing that I'd forgotten about living. Darren and I were just talking about it in the car, she said, glancing over at my former fiancé who stood near the guest book, his salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit a testament to the success he'd achieved. How sad it is that you never recovered from losing him. The past tense hung between us like a death sentence. Never recovered. As if I were some pathetic creature who'd been pining away for 4 years, waiting for scraps of attention from a man who'd chosen my sister over me. He feels terrible about it, you know, she continued, her voice taking on that particular tone of mock concern she'd perfected over the years. Guilty even. But what could he do? He fell in love with someone else. These things happen. Someone else. Not just anyone, her. His fiancée's sister. The woman who'd smiled at our engagement party, who'd helped me pick out wedding invitations, who'd stood in my kitchen discussing bridesmaids' dresses while planning to steal my groom. The heart wants what it wants, she said with a delicate shrug, as if she were discussing the weather rather than the systematic destruction of my life. And obviously his heart wanted someone more sophisticated, more worldly, more woman. The final words landed like a slap. More woman. The implication was clear. I was somehow less than, lacking in the essential qualities that made a person worthy of love and commitment. I could feel the attention of nearby mourners beginning to drift our way. Aunt Margaret kept glancing over with concern, probably wondering why the two sisters were having such an intense conversation at their father's funeral. Old family friends were starting to notice the tension crackling between us like electricity before a storm. I hope you don't think I'm being cruel, Vanessa said, her voice suddenly syrupy with false kindness. I'm just worried about you. We all are. Standing here alone, no husband, no children, no real life to speak of. Dad used to worry about you too, you know. He'd ask me if I thought you'd ever find someone. The mention of our father's concern felt like a betrayal all over again. Had he really worried about my solitude? Had he seen me as the tragic spinster daughter who couldn't hold on to a man? He wanted both his girls to be happy, she continued, her perfectly manicured hand resting on her flat stomach in a gesture that made me wonder if there was another announcement coming. And I am happy, Laura. Blissfully, completely happy. I have everything a woman could want. She gestured subtly toward Darren, who was now signing the guest book with the Mont Blanc pen he'd always carried. The same pen he'd used to sign our apartment lease. The same pen he'd probably used to sign his wedding certificate with my sister. A husband who adores me, a beautiful home, financial security, a future filled with possibilities. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to highlight everything I didn't have. While you have your little apartment in Seattle and your job at that marketing firm. It's honest work, I suppose. The dismissal in her voice made my cheeks burn hotter. My little apartment was actually a charming one-bedroom with a view of the Sound, and my job was fulfilling in ways I'd never expected. But somehow, under her scrutiny, my carefully rebuilt life felt small and insignificant. I just don't understand how you can be content with so little, she said, tilting her head with genuine seeming confusion. Don't you want more? Don't you want what I have? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Did I want what she had? The cheating husband, the marriage built on betrayal, the constant need to prove her worth through material possessions? I mean, look at us, she continued, gesturing between her designer ensemble and my simple black dress. Look at where we are in life. I'm living my dreams while you're... what? Existing? Surviving. The words cut deep because they touched on my greatest fear, that I'd become so focused on healing that I'd forgotten how to truly live. That I'd let her betrayal turn me into exactly what she was describing, a woman who existed rather than thrived. But don't worry, she said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. I'm sure someday you'll find someone. Maybe not someone like Darren, obviously, but someone appropriate. Someone who doesn't mind that you're a little damaged. Damaged. The word hit like a physical blow, echoing in my head with the force of absolute truth. Is that what I was? Damaged goods that only a certain type of man would be willing to accept? I should go comfort Darren, she said, glancing over at my former fiancé who was now shaking hands with one of Dad's business partners. He gets emotional at funerals. All that sensitivity that made me fall in love with him in the first place. She started to turn away, then paused as if struck by a sudden thought. Oh, and Laura, you might want to consider therapy. I know a wonderful counselor who specializes in women who've had trouble moving on from past relationships. She might be able to help you finally let go and find some peace. The suggestion felt like the final insult. As if my pain was something to be fixed, my lingering hurt a character flaw that needed professional intervention. But as she began to walk away, something inside me shifted. Maybe it was the therapy I'd already completed, maybe it was the 4 years of hard-won self-discovery, or maybe it was simply the knowledge that I'd survived her worst and emerged stronger. I thought about the man who'd kissed me goodbye that morning, who'd promised to be there for me through whatever this day brought. The man who'd spent the last 2 years showing me what real love looked like. Not the desperate, needy attachment I'd mistaken for love with Darren, but something deeper and more genuine. "Actually, Vanessa," I said, my voice carrying a calm that surprised even me. "There's something I think you should know." She turned back, eyebrows raised in polite curiosity, probably expecting another moment of vulnerability she could exploit. "I'm not alone," I continued, stepping aside as I saw him approaching through the crowd of mourners. "I haven't been alone for a long time." I smiled, genuinely smiled, for the first time since walking into the funeral home. "Have you met my husband?" The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Her perfectly applied foundation couldn't hide the sudden pallor, and her diamond earrings seemed to tremble as her hands began to shake. Because she recognized him instantly. They both did. And in that moment I knew the tables had finally turned. The memory crashed over me like a rogue wave as I watched the recognition dawn in Vanessa's eyes. 4 years melted away in an instant, and I was 24 again, standing in the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel at the annual Children's Cancer Research Gala. The chandelier cast golden light across designer gowns and tuxedos, champagne flutes clinked in celebration of the evening's fundraising success, and I had just met the man I thought would change my life forever. Darren Mitchell stood near the silent auction display, studying a weekend getaway package to Napa Valley with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to making important decisions. His charcoal gray suit was perfectly tailored, his confidence evident in the way he carried himself. Not arrogant, just assured. When our mutual friend Sarah introduced us, his handshake was firm, his smile genuine, and his eyes held mine just long enough to make my pulse quicken. "Laura works at Precision Marketing," Sarah had explained. "She's the creative genius behind that viral campaign for the eco-friendly startup everyone's talking about." "Impressive," Darren had said, and something in his tone made me believe he actually meant it. "I've been following that company's growth. Brilliant positioning strategy." We talked for 20 minutes about sustainable business practices, the challenges of startup marketing, and the delicate balance between profit and purpose. He listened, really listened, asking thoughtful questions that showed he valued my opinions. When he asked for my business card, I felt like I was floating. Our first date was dinner at a small Italian restaurant in Pioneer Square. He arrived with a single white tulip, my favorite flower, which he'd somehow remembered from our brief conversation about spring gardens. The gesture felt both thoughtful and perfectly understated. We talked until the restaurant staff began stacking chairs around us, lost in discussions about travel dreams, family traditions, and the books that had shaped our worldviews. By our third date, I was already imagining introducing him to my family. He had this way of making me feel heard, valued, like my thoughts and dreams mattered to someone who understood ambition and success. When he kissed me goodnight outside my apartment building, his lips soft and tentative, I felt like the heroine of every romance novel I'd secretly devoured. Dad loved him immediately. They bonded over golf, business strategy, and their shared appreciation for single malt whiskey. I'd find them on the back porch during family dinners, deep in conversation about market trends and investment opportunities. Dad would light up whenever Darren's name came up in conversation, constantly praising his intelligence, his work ethic, his obvious devotion to me. "That boy's going places," Dad would say, beaming with pride as if Darren were already his son-in-law. "And he clearly adores you, sweetheart. The way he looks at you, like you hung the moon." Even Mom, who'd passed away 2 years earlier, would have approved. I could feel her presence sometimes during those early months with Darren, could almost hear her whispering that she'd finally found someone worthy of her oldest daughter. Vanessa's initial reaction had been carefully calibrated enthusiasm. She gushed about how perfect we looked together, how lucky I was to have found such a catch, how excited she was to potentially have Darren as a brother-in-law. But even then, something felt slightly off about her effusiveness. Her compliments came too quickly, her smile seemed practiced, And her hugs lasted just a beat too long, as if she were studying him rather than simply welcoming him to the family. "He's absolutely gorgeous," she'd whispered to me after our first family barbecue, her fingers lingering on my arm. "Those eyes, that smile, you better hold on to him tight, sis. Men like that don't stay single long." The comment had made me laugh at the time, but looking back it felt more like a warning than encouragement. The engagement came 8 months later during a weekend trip to Vancouver. Darren had planned everything perfectly: sunset dinner at a waterfront restaurant, a private table overlooking the harbor, the ring hidden in a dessert that arrived with, "Will you marry me?" written in chocolate script across the plate. I said yes before he'd even finished his nervous speech about wanting to spend forever making me happy. The ring was beautiful, a classic solitaire setting with a diamond that caught light like captured starfire. Not the biggest stone I'd ever seen, but elegant and timeless. "I wanted something that would suit you," Darren had explained. Classic, sophisticated, enduring. Wedding planning consumed the next 6 months of my life. I threw myself into every detail with the same intensity one brought to my marketing campaigns. Venue scouting, dress fittings, menu tastings, flower arrangements. Vanessa offered to help and I gratefully accepted. She had an eye for style and unlimited time since she'd recently left her job at the art gallery. "Let me handle the vendor meetings," she'd insisted. "You're so busy with work and I love this stuff. We want everything to be perfect for your special day." Her dedication seemed touching at first. She attended cake tastings when I couldn't leave the office, met with photographers to review portfolios, even helped coordinate with Darren's groomsmen about tuxedo fittings. I felt lucky to have such a supportive sister, someone who cared enough about my happiness to invest so much time and energy in making my wedding dreams come true. But gradually, small cracks began to appear in my perfect life. Darren started working later, missing dinners we'd planned, arriving at my apartment with apologies and explanations about difficult clients and project deadlines. His phone buzzed constantly during our time together, texts and calls that he'd answer with quick, whispered conversations in the hallway or bathroom. "Sorry, babe," he'd say, returning with a distracted kiss on my forehead. "Crisis at the office. You know how it is." I did know how it was. I worked in a demanding field too. But something about his explanations felt rehearsed, like lines he'd practiced in advance. Then there was the perfume. Subtle at first, just a hint of something floral and expensive clinging to his shirts when I picked up his dry cleaning. Not my scent. I'd always preferred clean, simple fragrances like vanilla or lavender. This was more sophisticated, more complex. Gardenias and jasmine with undertones of something darker, more sensual. "Must be from a client meeting," he'd explained when I mentioned it. "You know how some women go overboard with perfume in professional settings." The explanation made sense, but the scent appeared more frequently. On his jacket after late meetings, on his car seats, even once on his pillow when I stayed over at his apartment. Each time he had a reasonable explanation. A female colleague who rode in his car, a client dinner at a restaurant where the hostess had been overperfumed, a hotel room that hadn't been properly aired out between guests. Meanwhile, Vanessa was becoming increasingly involved in our relationship. She'd drop by Darren's office with coffee and pastries, claiming she was in the neighborhood, after meeting with wedding vendors. She'd text him directly about ceremony details instead of going through me, explaining that she didn't want to bother me during busy workdays. "Your sister is amazing," Darren would say after these encounters. "So thoughtful, so organized. You're lucky to have someone who cares so much about making your day perfect." I should have been grateful. Instead, I felt oddly displaced, like I was watching my own wedding being planned from the outside. Vanessa knew details about our flowers that I hadn't approved, had opinions about our menu choices that somehow carried more weight than mine, and spoke about our vision, as if she were the bride instead of the helpful sister. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening in March. I'd left work early with a splitting headache and decided to surprise Darren with dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant. His assistant had mentioned he was working late on a proposal, so I figured he could use the sustenance and company. The building directory in his office lobby listed his company on the 14th floor. I took the elevator up, balancing takeout containers in my purse, mentally rehearsing the surprised smile I'd give when he looked up from his computer. The hallway was dimly lit, most offices already empty for the evening. His door was slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the corridor. I could hear voices inside, his familiar baritone and another voice that made my blood run cold with recognition. "We can't keep doing this," Darren was saying, his voice heavy with an emotion I'd never heard from him before. "She's going to find out." "Not if we're careful," came the reply in Vanessa's unmistakable whisper. "The wedding's only 2 months away. After that we can figure out how to." I pushed the door open without thinking, my hands moving of their own accord. The takeout containers hit the floor with a crash of spilled curry and broken styrofoam, but I barely noticed the mess spreading across the expensive carpet. They were wrapped around each other on his leather couch, her dress half unbuttoned, his shirt completely gone. 4 months of wedding planning, 8 months of what I'd thought was love, and 2 years of believing I'd finally found my happily ever after. All of it crumbled to ash in the space between one heartbeat and the next. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, Vanessa's face flushed with shame and something else. Triumph, maybe, or relief at finally being caught. "Laura," Darren started, reaching for his shirt with shaking hands. We didn't mean for." But I was already backing toward the door, my engagement ring sliding off my finger before conscious thought could stop the motion. It hit his desk with a tiny, crystalline sound that somehow seemed louder than my breaking heart. I ran. The sound of my car door slamming echoed through the empty parking garage beneath my new apartment building in Seattle's Capitol Hill neighborhood. Everything I owned in the world sat crammed into my Honda Civic. 3 suitcases, a box of books, my laptop, and a pathetic collection of kitchen essentials I'd grabbed during my 15-minute escape from the life I'd built with Darren. I'd driven straight through from home, stopping only for gas and terrible coffee, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white somewhere around Spokane. The GPS had guided me to this address that I'd found on Craigslist during a desperate 3 a.m. apartment hunt. A studio apartment I'd rented sight unseen because the landlord was willing to waive the credit check for an extra month's deposit. The building smelled like old carpet and industrial disinfectant. My apartment was on the 4th floor, accessible only by a narrow staircase that groaned under the weight of my belongings. As I unlocked the door marked 4C, I held my breath, unsure what level of disaster awaited me. The space was smaller than I'd imagined, maybe 400 square feet if I was being generous. A Murphy bed dominated one wall, a kitchenette barely large enough for one person occupied another, and 2 windows overlooked a brick wall and a narrow alley where cats fought over garbage scraps. The hardwood floors were scarred with decades of previous tenants' lives, and the bathroom had clearly been added as an afterthought, cramped and poorly ventilated. It was perfect. Anonymous, affordable, and completely removed from everything that reminded me of the person I used to be. I spent my first week in Seattle eating cereal for every meal and crying at random intervals, in the grocery store checkout line, while folding my few pieces of clothing, during commercial breaks of mindless television shows. The tears came without warning, triggered by everything and nothing. A couple holding hands on the street. A jewelry store advertisement. The simple act of making coffee for one instead of 2. My bank account dwindled with terrifying speed. I'd quit my job in a moment of emotional upheaval, burning bridges with a resignation email that was far more honest than professional. Savings that had once seemed substantial now looked pitiful when stretched to cover rent, utilities, groceries, and the basic necessities of starting over from absolute zero. The job search felt like a special kind of torture. Every interview required me to explain the gap in my employment, to craft careful lies about seeking new challenges, instead of admitting I'd fled my hometown after discovering my fiancé and sister together. Rejection emails arrived with clockwork regularity, each one a small confirmation that I was as fundamentally broken as I felt. Finally, after 3 weeks of increasingly desperate applications, I received a call from a small digital marketing agency called Bloom Creative. They needed an administrative assistant, someone to answer phones, schedule meetings, organize files, and handle the unglamorous tasks that kept the business running. The pay was barely above minimum wage, the benefits non-existent, and the office was located in a converted warehouse that smelled perpetually of coffee and industrial printer ink. I took the job immediately. My first day at Bloom Creative, I arrived 20 minutes early and sat in my car in the parking lot, giving myself a pep talk that felt more like a threat. You can do this, Laura. You can answer phones. You can file paperwork. You can act like a normal human being for 8 hours. The office was a chaos of creative energy that both intimidated and fascinated me. Graphic designers hunched over massive monitors, their workstations covered in color swatches and typography samples. Account managers gestured frantically during client calls, switching between charm and panic with impressive speed. The air hummed with deadlines, caffeine addiction, and the particular tension that comes from running a small business on passion and prayer. My desk was tucked into a corner near the reception area, equipped with an ancient computer, a phone that rang constantly, and a filing system that appeared to have been organized by someone having a nervous breakdown. My supervisor, Janet, was a harried woman in her 50s who spoke in rapid-fire sentences and consumed coffee like it was a life-sustaining medication. Just answer the phone politely, schedule meetings without creating conflicts, and try not to lose any important paperwork, she'd said on my first morning. Oh, and don't take anything the creative team says personally. They're artists. They communicate through sarcasm and existential crisis. The work was mind-numbing but mercifully distracting. I answered calls from clients who wanted to know why their logos weren't more purple, scheduled meetings between people who seemed to actively despise each other, and filed invoices with the methodical precision of someone grateful to have concrete tasks that couldn't break her heart. During my lunch breaks, I'd walk to Pike Place Market and sit on a bench overlooking Elliott Bay, watching ferries shuttle back and forth between Seattle and the islands. The water changed color throughout the day, steel gray in the morning, deep blue in the afternoon, almost black by evening. I'd eat sandwiches from a corner deli and try to imagine what kind of person I might become in this new place. After 2 months of barely surviving, Janet pulled me aside after work one Friday. "You seem competent," she said, which I'd learned was high praise coming from her. "And you're the first admin we've had who doesn't cry when the designers get cranky. How would you feel about taking on some client coordination responsibilities? It comes with a raise." The additional duties involved managing project timelines, serving as a buffer between creative teams and demanding clients, and occasionally writing emails that required actual thinking rather than just scheduling. For the first time since fleeing home, I felt like my brain was being used for something more complex than basic survival. One particularly stressful Thursday, after a client had screamed at me over the phone about font choices for 20 minutes, I found myself crying in the bathroom stall during my lunch break. Not the gentle tears of grief I'd grown accustomed to, but ugly, frustrated sobs that came from feeling completely overwhelmed by the simplest adult responsibilities. "Rough day?" asked a voice from the neighboring stall. I looked down to see sensible black flats and gray slacks. Ruth from accounting, a woman in her early 40s with prematurely silver hair and an endless supply of cardigans who'd been unfailingly kind since my first day. "Just client stuff," I managed, trying to make my voice sound normal. "Want to grab a drink after work? I know a place with terrible wine and excellent therapy potential." Something about her matter-of-fact offer broke through my carefully maintained isolation. "I don't really drink much anymore," I admitted. "Neither do I. But sometimes sitting in a bar and pretending you might order alcohol is exactly the kind of normal you need." We ended up at a dive bar called the Comet, nursing ginger Alish and sharing a basket of greasy fries while Ruth told me about her divorce 3 years earlier and her ongoing battle with her teenage daughter's rebellion phase. "You know what saved my sanity?" she asked, stealing a fry from my side of the basket. "Therapy. Good therapy, not the kind where someone just nods and asks how that makes you feel. I found this woman, Dr. Patricia Chin, who basically rebuilt my brain from the ground up." She slid a business card across the sticky table. "She's expensive, but she's worth every penny. And she has a sliding scale for people who are rebuilding their lives." Dr. Chen's office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of the sterile, clinical environment I'd imagined, her space felt warm and lived in. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with psychology texts mixed with novels and poetry collections. Her desk was covered with succulents in mismatched pots, and a large window overlooked a small garden where wind chimes created a gentle soundtrack to our sessions. "Tell me about the person you were before," she said during our first meeting, her voice carrying a slight accent that made every word sound carefully considered. I'd expected to talk about Darren, about the betrayal, about the wedding that never happened. Instead, we spent weeks exploring who I'd been before I'd ever met him. The ambitious marketing professional who'd landed her dream job straight out of college. The daughter who'd organized surprise parties for her parents' anniversaries. The friend who'd driven 6 hours to help someone move apartments. Trauma has a way of making us forget our own strength, Dr. Chin explained during one particularly difficult session. You survived something that would have broken many people. That's not weakness, that's remarkable resilience. Slowly, painfully, I began to remember that I was more than just someone who'd been betrayed. I was someone who'd built a successful career from nothing, who'd maintained friendships through college and beyond, who'd once been confident enough to give presentations to rooms full of executives without breaking a sweat. The healing wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and hopeful, ready to rebuild my life with purpose and intention. Other days I'd find myself crying over a romantic comedy trailer or avoiding the grocery store because I couldn't bear to see couples shopping together. But gradually the good days began to outnumber the bad ones. Ruth's friendship became my anchor to normalcy. She invited me to her book club, a group of women who met monthly to discuss novels and drink wine in each other's living rooms. At first I sat quietly in corners, contributing little to conversations about complex characters and plot twists. But as months passed I found myself engaging more, offering opinions, even laughing at inside jokes. "You're different," Ruth observed one evening as we walked back to our cars after a particularly lively discussion about a mystery novel set in post-war London. "When you first started coming to these meetings, you looked like you were ready to bolt at any second. Now you look like you actually want to be here." He was right. For the first time in months, I'd spent an entire evening without thinking about Darren or Vanessa or the life I'd lost. I'd been present, engaged, genuinely interested in other people's thoughts and experiences. That night I called Dr. Chin and left a voicemail. "I think I'm ready to start dating again. Not because I'm lonely, but because I think I might actually have something to offer someone." Her return call came the next morning. "That," she said, "is exactly the right reason." Dating after betrayal felt like learning to walk again after a devastating accident. Every step tentative, every movement measured for potential pain. My first attempt was a disaster of epic proportions. Ruth had set me up with her neighbor's brother, a perfectly nice accountant named Kevin who spent our entire coffee date explaining his coin collection and asking if I'd ever considered the investment potential of vintage baseball cards. I excused myself after 45 minutes, claiming a work emergency, and spent the drive home wondering if I was destined to attract men who were either unfaithful or unbearably boring. Maybe those were my only options now, cheaters or collectors of outdated sports memorabilia. The second date was worse. A software engineer from a dating app who arrived 20 minutes late, ordered the most expensive item on the menu, and spent the evening mansplaining my own marketing career to me. When he suggested we split the bill after eating 2 appetizers, an entree and 3 craft cocktails while I nursed a single glass of wine and a salad, I decided the universe was sending me a clear message about my romantic future. "Maybe I'm just meant to be single," I told Dr. Chin during our session the following week. "Maybe some people are designed for solitude." "Or maybe," she replied with that knowing smile I'd grown to both love and fear, "you're just not meeting the right people in the right circumstances. Sometimes the best connections happen when we're not actively searching for them." She was right, though I wouldn't realize it for another 3 months. Marcus walked into my life on a Tuesday morning in October, carrying a box of promotional materials for a client presentation and wearing a navy blue sweater that brought out the gray in his eyes. He wasn't particularly tall, maybe 5'10", but he moved with a quiet confidence that commanded attention without demanding it. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, and when he smiled at Janet while introducing himself, the expression seemed genuine rather than practiced. "This is Laura," Janet said, gesturing toward my desk. "She'll be your point person for the Morrison Hotels project." He turned to me with that same smile, extending his hand in a firm handshake that lasted exactly the appropriate amount of time, long enough to be warm, short enough to remain professional. "Marcus Hamilton," he said. "I'm looking forward to working with you." His voice was deeper than I'd expected, with a slight rasp that suggested either a long-time smoking habit or naturally low vocal cords. When our eyes met, I felt a small flutter of something that might have been attraction, but I pushed it down immediately. Work was work, and I'd learned to keep those boundaries crystal clear. Marcus owned a boutique consulting firm that specialized in hospitality industry marketing, restaurants, hotels, tourism boards. His approach was methodical and thorough, unlike many of our clients who changed their minds every few days and expected us to read their thoughts about color schemes and font preferences. Our first meeting lasted 2 hours. While most clients spent project kickoffs talking about themselves and their revolutionary vision for disrupting their industry, Marcus asked questions about our process, our timeline, our previous experience with similar brands. He took notes in a leather-bound notebook, writing with an expensive pen that he handled like a precision instrument. "What do you think makes a hospitality brand memorable?" he asked me directly while Janet was distracted by a phone call. The question caught me off guard. Most clients treated me like a glorified secretary whose opinion on actual strategy was neither wanted nor valued. "Consistency," I said after a moment's thought. "Not just in visual identity but in experience. The best hotel brands make you feel the same way whether you're in New York or Nashville. They understand that luxury isn't about thread count, it's about feeling understood." He nodded slowly, making another note. "That's exactly right. Most people think hospitality marketing is about amenities and location. But it's really about emotional connection." Over the following weeks, Marcus became my favorite client to work with. He responded to emails promptly, provided feedback that was specific and actionable, and never once raised his voice or questioned my competence when project details needed adjustment. When our designer quit unexpectedly in the middle of his campaign, leaving us scrambling to meet deadlines, Marcus simply asked what he could do to help rather than threatening to take his business elsewhere. "I could reach out to some freelancers I've worked with before," he offered during an emergency meeting. "No obligation to use them, but it might give you some options while you're interviewing replacements." The freelancer he recommended ended up being exactly what we needed: talented, reliable, and available immediately. When I thanked Marcus for the referral, he shrugged as if helping solve our staffing crisis was the most natural thing in the world. "Good people should support each other," he said simply. Our professional relationship began shifting into something more personal during the final weeks of his project. He started arriving a few minutes early for meetings, lingering afterward to chat about everything except work. I learned he'd grown up in Portland, studied business at Northwestern, and moved to Seattle 5 years earlier to be closer to his aging mother. He asked about my background with genuine curiosity, listening to my carefully edited stories about leaving my hometown for new opportunities without pressing for details I wasn't ready to share. "You seem like someone who's lived through interesting times," he said one afternoon as we walked to his car after a particularly productive strategy session. "Interesting is one way to put it," I replied, surprised by how much I wanted to tell him the whole truth. "The best people usually have complicated stories," he said, unlocking his car, a practical Honda that was impeccably clean inside and out. "Simple backgrounds tend to produce boring personalities." When his project officially concluded, I felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. Our meetings had become the highlight of my work week, small islands of intelligent conversation and genuine respect in an ocean of difficult clients and impossible deadlines. "I hope we'll work together again soon," I said as we shook hands in the lobby after our final presentation. "Actually," Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty I'd never heard from him before, "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Not work-related. Just dinner." The invitation hung between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was brave enough to cross. He must have seen the hesitation in my eyes because he quickly added, "No pressure. I just thought it might be nice to continue our conversations without project deadlines hanging over us." "I'd like that," I heard myself saying before my anxious brain could construct a list of reasons to decline. Our first non-work dinner was at a small French bistro in Fremont. Marcus had chosen the restaurant carefully, intimate enough for real conversation but public enough to feel safe. He arrived with a single white tulip just like Darren had on our first date, but somehow the gesture felt completely different. Where Darren's flower had felt calculated, designed to impress, Marcus's tulip seemed thoughtful and understated. "I remembered you mentioned these were your favorites," he said, looking almost embarrassed by his own romanticism. We talked for 3 hours, the conversation flowing naturally from travel dreams to family memories to books we'd loved and movies that had disappointed us. Marcus was funny in an unexpected way, his humor dry and observational rather than attention-seeking. He made me laugh until my cheeks hurt, something I hadn't done in longer than I cared to calculate. When he walked me to my car, I found myself hoping he'd ask me out again before I'd even driven away. He did 3 days later with a text message that was perfectly Marcus, direct but warm. "Would you like to try that new Thai place downtown Saturday night? I promise not to order anything too spicy if you promise to tell me more about your book club's latest dramatic selection. Our second date led to a third, then a fourth. Slowly, carefully, we began building something that felt both exciting and safe. Marcus never pushed for information about my past, never pressured me to move faster than I was comfortable with, never made assumptions about what I wanted or needed. He simply showed up, consistently and reliably, offering companionship without conditions. 3 months into dating, during a quiet dinner at his apartment, Marcus poured himself a second glass of wine and said, "There's something I should probably tell you about my work history." My stomach clenched automatically. Experience had taught me that sentences beginning with, "There's something I should tell you," rarely ended well. "I used to compete directly with someone you might know," he continued, his eyes meeting mine across the candlelit table. "Darren Mitchell. Small world, right?" The wine glass slipped from my fingers, hitting the table with a sharp clink that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Marcus reached across immediately, steadying both the glass and my trembling hand. "I nearly dropped my wine," I said stupidly, my brain struggling to process what he'd just revealed. "I figured you might have a reaction," he said gently. "Want to talk about it?" The silence that followed my introduction stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Marcus stepped closer, his presence solid and reassuring beside me, while Vanessa's face cycled through a spectrum of emotions I'd never seen from her before. Shock, recognition, confusion, and finally, something that looked suspiciously like panic. "Marcus Hamilton," he said, extending his hand to Vanessa with the same professional courtesy he'd shown countless clients. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though I certainly know who you are." Vanessa's perfectly manicured hand trembled as she accepted his handshake, her usual predatory confidence nowhere to be found. The woman who'd built a career out of manipulating social situations suddenly looked like she'd forgotten how to speak. "Hello," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The transformation was remarkable. In less than 30 seconds she'd gone from triumphant tormentor to confused prey. Darren had gone completely rigid beside her, his face pale beneath his expensive tan. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing in quicksand with no rope in sight. "Hamilton," Darren said, his voice carefully controlled but carrying an undercurrent of something that might have been fear. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Family connections," Marcus replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Laura's father was a remarkable man. Though I suppose you knew that, having been engaged to his daughter once upon a time." The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward to the other mourners within earshot. I could see heads turning, whispered conversations pausing as people tried to piece together the sudden tension crackling between the four of us. Mrs. Henderson, who'd been standing near the flower arrangements, took a small step closer, her hearing aid probably picking up more than she was pretending. Behind her, I could see Dad's business partner, Robert Chin, watching our little group with the sharp attention of someone who recognized the early stages of a significant drama. "Engaged." Vanessa's voice cracked slightly on the word, as if she were just now processing the full implications of Marcus's presence. "Laura, you never mentioned." "There's a lot I never mentioned," I said quietly, surprised by how calm I felt. The anxiety that had been clawing at my chest since entering the funeral home had transformed into something else. Not quite satisfaction but a deep sense of rightness, as if the universe had finally decided to balance the scales. Marcus's hand found mine, his fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. The simple touch communicated volumes. Solidarity, support, and an unshakable certainty that whatever came next we'd face it together. "You two are married?" Darren asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that bordered on insulting. As if the idea that I could have found someone successful and accomplished, was beyond his comprehension. 2 years this October, Marcus replied, his thumb tracing a gentle circle across my wedding ring. "Laura's brought more joy to my life than I thought possible." The declaration was simple but devastating in its sincerity. Where Darren had always spoken about our relationship in terms of what I could do for him, boost his social standing, support his ambitions, provide companionship when convenient, Marcus spoke about what I'd given him simply by existing. I watched Vanessa's face as the full scope of the situation began to dawn on her. This wasn't just any random man I'd married to spite her. This was Marcus Hamilton, Someone whose name clearly meant something to both her and Darren, whose presence here represented far more than a simple romantic rebound. But how did you? She started, then stopped, apparently realizing that any question she asked would only dig her deeper into whatever hole she was discovering beneath her feet. How did we meet? I supplied helpfully. Marcus was a client at my marketing firm in Seattle. We worked together on a campaign for Morrison Hotels. Such a successful project. It really established his company as a major player in hospitality consulting. Each word was carefully chosen, designed to highlight not just Marcus's professional success but also my own competence and independence. The woman standing here wasn't the broken, abandoned creature Vanessa had expected to find. I'd built a career, a life, a marriage, all without her permission or oversight. Robert Chin had moved closer now, no longer pretending not to eavesdrop. His eyes held a glimmer of recognition that made Darren shift uncomfortably. "Hamilton," Robert said, stepping into our circle with the confidence of someone who'd just connected important dots. "Weren't you the one who landed the Pacific Northwest Tourism Board contract? Quite the coup from what I heard. Especially considering the competition." Marcus nodded modestly. "We were fortunate to present the strongest proposal." "Strongest proposal," Darren repeated, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration. "Is that what you're calling it?" "I'm calling it good business," Marcus replied, his tone remaining perfectly level. "Though I understand your perspective might be different." The exchange was subtle enough that casual observers might miss its significance, but I could see the understanding dawning on several faces around us. Whatever had happened between Marcus and Darren in their professional lives, it hadn't ended well for Darren. "You underbid us by 30%, Darren said, abandoning any pretense of funeral propriety. "That's not strategy, that's desperation." "I provided better value," Marcus corrected gently. "There's a difference." The client certainly seemed to think so, considering they've retained our services for 3 additional projects since then. Vanessa's eyes darted between the two men like she was watching a tennis match, her usual social sophistication completely abandoned. She looked lost, confused, like someone who'd walked into a movie halfway through and couldn't follow the plot. "I don't understand," she said finally, her voice small and uncertain. "How long have you two known each other?" "Professionally? About 6 years," Marcus said. "Though we've only worked in direct competition twice. Both times were illuminating." Mrs. Henderson had given up all pretense of not listening and was now openly staring at our group. Behind her, I could see other mourners beginning to cluster closer, drawn by the unmistakable energy of family drama unfolding in real time. "Laura never mentioned any of this," Vanessa said, her voice gaining a slight edge as she tried to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "Laura and I don't discuss my business rivalries at home," Marcus replied smoothly. "We prefer to focus on more pleasant topics. Though I suspect she might have found this particular connection amusing, given the circumstances." The understatement hung in the air like incense. Amusing barely began to cover how I felt about discovering that my new husband had not only known my ex-fiancé but had apparently bested him in business on multiple occasions. Darren's jaw worked silently, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The composure he'd maintained throughout the funeral was cracking, revealing something ugly and desperate underneath his polished exterior. "You planned this," he said suddenly, his voice loud enough to carry to the growing circle of observers. "This whole thing, meeting Laura, marrying her, it's all some elaborate revenge scheme." The accusation was so absurd, so completely divorced from reality that I actually laughed. The sound emerged before I could stop it, bright and genuine in the heavy atmosphere of grief and tension. "Revenge," I repeated, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet that had fallen over our corner of the funeral home. "You think I married Marcus to get back at you?" The idea was so ridiculous that even some of the eavesdropping mourners looked skeptical. Darren's paranoia was showing, his inflated sense of his own importance on full display for everyone to see. "That would require me to still care about you enough to plan revenge," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "It would require me to think about you at all." The truth of that statement hit me as I spoke it. For the first time in 4 years, I realized that Darren had become irrelevant to my life. Not someone I hated or resented, but simply someone who no longer mattered. Marcus squeezed my hand gently, A small gesture of approval and support that grounded me in the present moment. Around us, the whispered conversations had resumed with new intensity. I could see the stories spreading through the crowd like ripples in a pond. The sister who'd stolen the fiancé, the abandoned bride who'd found something better, the business rivals meeting at a family funeral. By tomorrow, half the town would know that Laura Mitchell had married the man who'd outmaneuvered Darren in business, and the other half would be calling their friends to catch up on the gossip. Vanessa seemed to understand this better than anyone. Her face had gone ashen as she watched our extended family and Dad's associates piece together the implications of what they were witnessing. For someone who'd built her identity around being envied and admired, the sudden shift in public perception was clearly devastating. The knock came 3 days after we'd returned to Seattle, soft and hesitant against our apartment door. Marcus was in his study, reviewing client proposals while I sorted through the condolence cards that had arrived in our absence. The funeral felt like a distant dream now, surreal in the way traumatic events often do once you're removed from their immediate aftermath. I opened the door expecting a neighbor or delivery person, but instead found Vanessa standing in our hallway. The transformation was so complete that for a moment I didn't recognize her. Gone were the designer clothes, the perfect makeup, the armor of expensive accessories that had defined her for as long as I could remember. She wore jeans, actual jeans, not the designer variety that cost more than most people's rent, and a simple gray sweater that looked like it had seen multiple wash cycles. Her face was bare of makeup, revealing dark circles under her eyes and a pallor that spoke of sleepless nights. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her hands, those perfectly manicured hands that had once displayed her massive wedding ring like a trophy, were naked except for a simple gold band that looked somehow diminished without its usual accompanying diamonds. "Laura," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying this stranger who wore my sister's face. Part of me wanted to close the door, to protect the peace Marcus and I had built from the chaos she represented. But another part, the part that remembered sharing secrets under blanket forts and practicing dance routines in our childhood bedroom, felt compelled to let her in. "Marcus is working," I said finally, stepping aside to allow her entry. "We can sit in the kitchen." She followed me through our small apartment, her eyes taking in the modest furnishings, the photographs of our wedding day, the comfortable clutter of two people who'd built a life together through careful accumulation rather than dramatic acquisition. If she was judging our simple lifestyle compared to the mansion she'd described at the funeral, her face didn't show it. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table, the same table where Marcus and I ate breakfast every morning, where we discussed our days over dinner, where we'd planned our future during countless quiet conversations. Having Vanessa in this sacred space felt like inviting a storm into a sanctuary. "I don't know where to start," she said, her hands wrapped around the coffee mug I'd offered her as if it were a lifeline. "Everything's falling apart, Laura. Everything." The words came out in a rush, as if she'd been holding them in for so long that they'd built up pressure behind her carefully constructed facade. She told me about the money, how Darren had been living beyond their means for years, using credit and loans to maintain the lifestyle he felt entitled to. The mansion was mortgaged to the hilt, the cars were leased with payments they could barely afford, and her jewelry, the diamonds she'd flaunted so proudly, were mostly financed through a high-end jeweler who was now threatening legal action. "He controls everything," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "Every credit card, every bank account, every investment. I don't even know how much debt we're really in because he handles all the finances. But the calls have started, collection agencies, lawyers, creditors. They call all day, every day." I listened without interrupting, watching my sister, this woman who'd once seemed invincible in her cruelty, crumble before my eyes. The irony wasn't lost on me that she'd spent the funeral bragging about having the man, the money, and the mansion, when all three were apparently built on financial quicksand. "The worst part," she continued, her voice dropping to barely audible, "is that I think he resents me for it. For the debt, for the pressure, for not being worth all the trouble he went through to get me." The phrase hung between us like a confession. To get me, as if she were a prize he'd won rather than a person he'd chosen to love. As if their entire relationship had been transactional from the beginning, and now that the transaction was proving costly, he was having buyer's remorse. "The funeral was the first time he'd looked at me with anything other than irritation in months," she admitted. And even then it was only because other people were watching. The moment we got in the car afterward, he started yelling about Marcus, about how I'd humiliated him, about how my family had always been beneath his standards. She looked up at me then, her eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Why didn't you ever fight me back, Laura? Why didn't you try to destroy me the way I destroyed you? The question caught me off guard, not because I hadn't expected it, but because I'd never really examined my own motivations closely enough to articulate an answer. Why hadn't I fought back? Why hadn't I tried to expose their affair before the wedding, or sought revenge in the immediate aftermath? Because I didn't have to, I said finally, the words coming from some deep well of understanding I hadn't known existed. Time fought for me. It was true, I realized as I said it. While I'd been rebuilding myself in Seattle, learning to be whole again, time had been working its own quiet justice. The relationship built on betrayal had rotted from within, just as Dad used to say about buildings constructed on weak foundations. You could paint over the cracks and reinforce the walls, but eventually the fundamental flaws would bring the whole structure down. Vanessa stared at me across the table, her expression a mixture of confusion and something that might have been admiration. You really moved on, she said. You actually built something real. Yes, I said simply. I did. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee mug in absent circles. When she spoke again, her voice was so soft I had to lean forward to hear her. I found something while I was cleaning out Dad's desk, she said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a small leather-bound journal. I thought you should see it. The journal was one I recognized from childhood, Dad's daily planner, where he'd written everything from business appointments to grocery lists to random thoughts that struck him throughout the day. Vanessa opened it to a page marked with a faded receipt and slid it across the table. The entry was dated 6 months before Dad's death, written in his familiar scrawl. Asterisk, talked to Laura today. She sounds happy, really happy, not just putting on a brave face. Her voice has music in it again, the way it used to when she was little and would sing while doing chores. I think she's found her way back to herself. My girls were once best friends, drawing pictures together, sharing everything, protecting each other from the world. Vanessa has forgotten that version of herself, but maybe someday she'll remember. Maybe someday they'll both find their way back to each other. The words blurred as tears I hadn't expected filled my eyes. Dad had seen through all of it. My careful cheerfulness during our phone calls, Vanessa's hollow victory, the fundamental sadness that had colored our family dynamics since the betrayal. But he'd also seen hope, possibility, the chance for healing that I'd never even considered. He never stopped believing we could fix this, Vanessa whispered, her own tears falling freely now. Even after everything I did, everything I destroyed, he still thought. She couldn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Dad had seen something in both of us that we'd lost sight of. The capacity for redemption, for growth, for becoming better than our worst moments. We sat in silence for several minutes. The journal opened between us like a bridge across 4 years of pain and resentment. I found myself remembering the sister Vanessa had been before jealousy and competition had poisoned our relationship. The girl who'd taught me to braid friendship bracelets, who'd stayed up all night with me when I had pneumonia, who'd fiercely defended me against playground bullies with the righteous fury of an avenging angel. I don't expect forgiveness, Vanessa said finally, closing the journal and sliding it back toward me. I don't deserve it, and I'm not even sure I know how to earn it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. What I took from you wasn't just a man or a wedding. I took your faith in family, in loyalty, in love itself. She stood up slowly, like someone much older than her 36 years. But you found your way back anyway. You found something real with Marcus, something I don't think I've ever had. That takes courage I never possessed. I walked her to the door, my heart heavy with emotions I couldn't name. This wasn't the dramatic confrontation I'd imagined for years, the moment where I'd finally unleash all my accumulated hurt and rage. Instead, it felt like watching someone I'd once loved very much finally understand the true cost of their choices. Vanessa, I called as she reached for the door handle. She turned back, hope flickering briefly in her exhausted eyes. You didn't ruin my life, I said, surprised by the calm certainty in my own voice. You shattered it completely. But you also gave me the chance to build something better from the pieces. Something that was actually mine. She nodded, a small smile ghosting across her lips, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her since childhood. Take care of yourself, I added. Really take care of yourself. After she left, I sat alone with Dad's journal, reading his words over and over until Marcus found me there an hour later. I told him about the visit, about the debt, about the quiet devastation of a life built on lies finally collapsing under its own weight. "Do you feel vindicated?" he asked, pulling me into his arms. I considered the question seriously. Did I feel vindicated? Satisfied? Triumphant? No, I said finally. I feel sad. But also, free. And for the first time in 4 years, that was enough. If this story of quiet triumph had you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Laura introduced Marcus and watched Vanessa's face turn to stone, realizing who he was. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more empowering stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. My sister-in-law always mocked me for living off my husband Matthew. After his untimely death, she took everything, kicked us out, and smirked with satisfaction. But she didn't expect her ex-husband, my lawyer, to happily dismantle her plans and fight for what was rightfully ours. The weight of grief pressed against my chest like an iron slab. My fingers trembled as I clutched the single white rose, its petals soft against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the cold reality before me. Matthew's coffin stood draped in a deep black cloth, surrounded by wreaths and flowers, the scent of lilies heavy in the air. Mourners whispered condolences, their voices hushed, their eyes filled with pity. But I barely heard them. My world had collapsed the moment Matthew took his last breath, and I was still trapped beneath the wreckage. Then, amid the sea of black-clad mourners, I saw her, Victoria. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her arms crossed over her chest, her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile but wasn't grief either. It was something else, something colder. I felt my stomach twist as she walked toward me, each step deliberate, slow, calculated. The woman had always despised me, but today she looked victorious. She leaned in, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "You won't be staying in his house much longer," she murmured, her tone laced with smug amusement. My breath hitched. "What?" She straightened, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, sweetheart. You didn't really think Matthew left everything to you, did you?" A chill ran through me, colder than the wind that rustled through the cemetery. My voice cracked. Victoria chuckled, the sound sending ice down my spine. "You'll see soon enough." And with that she walked away, leaving me standing there, stunned, my heart pounding. The service continued, but I couldn't focus. Victoria's words echoed in my mind, gnawing at me. What did she mean? Matthew had always made sure I was taken care of. We'd built a life together, shared everything. He wouldn't have left me with nothing. But as I stood there, gripping the rose so tightly that the stem bent beneath my fingers, I couldn't shake the feeling that my nightmare was only just beginning. As the funeral ended, people began to drift away, murmuring soft condolences before leaving me alone in the crisp afternoon air. My son Ethan clung to my side, his small fingers tightening around my hand. He didn't fully understand what was happening, only that his father was gone. I knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Come on, sweetheart," I whispered. "Let's go home." Home. The word felt fragile in my mouth, like something that could shatter at any moment. Victoria was the last to leave, lingering by her car watching me. Her smirk was still there, that same cold satisfaction curling at the corners of her lips. Then she got into her sleek black car and drove off, leaving a trail of dust in her wake. I exhaled sharply. Whatever she had planned, I would not let her destroy the last pieces of my life. But I had no idea how wrong I was. The following day, exhaustion clung to my bones as I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty cup of coffee in front of me. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. The house felt too empty without Matthew, too silent. A sharp knock at the door startled me. My heart leaped into my throat. I set my cup down and made my way to the door, peering through the peephole. A man in a pressed suit stood outside, a briefcase in one hand, a stack of papers in the other. Unease slithered through me. I opened the door slowly. "Can I help you?" The man offered a polite but firm nod. "Mrs. Carter?" I hesitated, then nodded. "My name is Robert Hayes. I'm here on behalf of your late husband's estate." My fingers tightened on the doorknob. "Estate." He handed me the papers. "Per legal documentation, The assets of Mr. Matthew Carter have been transferred to his next of kin. Confusion flickered through me. I'm his wife. Mr. Hayes gave me a look of practiced sympathy. I'm aware, ma'am. But the documents indicate that Mr. Carter's estate has been legally transferred to Victoria Carter. The words hit me like a slap. What? I grabbed the papers, scanning them, my eyes darting over the dense legal jargon. My hands began to shake as I reached the final page. Victoria's name was listed as the primary beneficiary. Not mine. Not Ethan's. Victoria's. My pulse pounded in my ears. This has to be a mistake. Matthew wouldn't do this. He wouldn't. Mr. Hayes exhaled softly, adjusting his tie. The documents were signed and filed before his passing. As of now, legally, Victoria Carter is the rightful owner of all assets, including the house you currently reside in. I stumbled back a step, my breath hitching. You're telling me I have nothing? He hesitated. I'm afraid so. A lump formed in my throat. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But then, as if summoned by my devastation, a familiar voice cut through the air. Well, looks like you finally got the news. I turned sharply to see Victoria standing at the edge of my driveway, her arms folded across her chest, that same smirk tugging at her lips. Fury and panic clashed inside me. You did this, I whispered, my voice shaking. You stole everything. Victoria let out a soft laugh. Stole? Please. The law is the law, darling. My brother made sure his estate was handled properly before he died. Can't argue with legal documentation now, can we? Tears burned my eyes. Matthew wouldn't do this. Victoria shrugged. Believe what you want. But you have 1 week to pack your things and get out. This house. This life. It's mine now. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement. I stood frozen, my entire body trembling. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a war. Thrown to the wolves. Over the next few days, reality settled in like a slow, creeping poison. The house that once held laughter and love now felt like a tomb. The bank accounts, our bank accounts, were drained. Every attempt I made to fight back was met with cold, impassable legal walls. Victoria had planned this. She had waited. And now she had won. The final blow came when movers arrived, armed with papers stating they were legally authorized to remove my belongings. As they packed away my life, my son clung to my leg, his small body trembling. Mommy, where are we going? I swallowed hard, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, baby. I didn't have an answer. Because for the first time in my life I had nowhere to go. And as I stood there watching Victoria's smug face from the doorway, I made a silent vow. She thinks she's won. But she has no idea what's coming. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. Boxes were stacked against the walls, my entire life reduced to neatly packed memories. Every framed picture of Matthew and me had been taken down, as if our years together had been erased overnight. The movers worked mechanically, carrying out furniture, books, clothes, everything I had built with my husband. My son, Ethan, sat curled up on the couch, his little fingers gripping his favorite stuffed animal, his eyes round with confusion. Mommy, why are they taking our stuff? I forced a smile even as my throat tightened. We're just moving, sweetheart. He frowned, not convinced, but didn't press further. His innocence made my heart ache. Victoria watched the scene unfold from the hallway, her arms crossed over her chest, a satisfied smirk on her face. I'd hurry if I were you. You've only got a few hours left before the locks get changed. Rage boiled beneath my skin, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not in front of Ethan and certainly not in front of her. I turned away, gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I needed answers. I needed help. I needed to fight back. A forgotten will or a stolen one. I spent the next few hours in a whirlwind of calls, attorneys, banks, even old family friends, searching for any loophole, any shred of evidence that Victoria had lied. But the response was the same. The will is legally binding. There are no other records of an updated will. There's nothing we can do. The words sank into me like stones, dragging me down into the cold depths of reality. But something didn't add up. Matthew had always been meticulous about our future. He had assured me, multiple times, that he had secured everything in a will. He wanted to make sure that if anything ever happened, Ethan and I would be protected. So where was that will? Had Matthew lied to me? Or had someone made sure that I never saw it? A sickening thought took root in my mind. Victoria. She had always resented me, treated me like I was an intruder in her family. If anyone had the motive to destroy an updated will, it was her. But proving it would be another matter entirely. Desperation pushed me toward Matthew's lawyer, the same one who had supposedly handled the estate transfer. His office was tucked inside a towering glass building, cold and sterile. When I arrived, the receptionist barely spared me a glance before instructing me to wait. An hour passed. Then another. By the time I was finally led into the lawyer's office, frustration was simmering beneath my grief. The man behind the desk, Robert Hayes, was the same one who had handed me those devastating papers. He looked up with a forced, sympathetic smile. "Mrs. Carter, I assume you're here about the estate." I sat down, my hands gripping the arms of the chair. "I need to know if my husband had an updated will. One that named me as the beneficiary." His expression didn't change, but I caught the flicker of hesitation in his eyes. "I'm afraid there was no such document on file." I narrowed my gaze. "That doesn't make sense. He told me he had one. He was very clear about it." Hayes sighed, adjusting the papers on his desk. "I understand this is a difficult time for you, but I can only go by the documents that exist. If another will had been made, it would have been filed through legal channels." I studied him, noting the tightness in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped nervously against the desk. He wasn't just dismissing me. He was hiding something. "Did Victoria get to you?" I asked, my voice low, steady. His tapping stopped. His face remained neutral, but the answer was clear in the way he didn't react. "She had." I leaned forward. "Look me in the eye and tell me Matthew never updated his will." Hayes swallowed, shifting in his chair. "Mrs. Carter, Tell me." For the briefest second, guilt flickered across his face. But then he masked it with professionalism. "I'm sorry. I can't help you." My stomach twisted. Victoria had covered her tracks well. Leaving the office, I felt numb. My worst fears were becoming reality. Victoria had not only taken everything, she had likely destroyed the one thing that could have saved me and Ethan from this nightmare. And she was enjoying every second of it. Later that evening, as I drove past my old home, I saw lights glowing warmly through the windows. The home that had once been mine was now occupied by her. I pulled over, my fingers clenching around the steering wheel. Through the glass, I saw Victoria, lounging in what used to be my living room, a glass of wine in her hand, her laughter spilling through the night. Anger surged through me, but I swallowed it down. I needed a plan. And I knew exactly who could help me. That night, as I tucked Ethan into bed at the cheap motel we were now forced to call home, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A familiar voice filled the line. "Heard you're in some trouble." My heart skipped a beat. Lucas. Victoria's ex-husband. A man I had barely spoken to in years. "Victoria's been bragging," he continued, "about how she played you. Thought you might need a friend." I exhaled sharply, gripping the phone tighter. "Do you know something?" Pause. "Then meet me tomorrow. We need to talk." The next morning, I met Lucas at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. He looked the same as I remembered, tall, well-dressed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He sipped his coffee, watching me carefully. "I'm going to cut to the chase," he said. "Victoria always wanted control. She was furious when Matthew married you. Thought you stole her brother away. She had the money, the connections, and she used them." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "She destroyed the will, didn't she?" Lucas nodded. "Most likely. But proving it? That's the hard part." I clenched my fist. "Then I'll do whatever it takes. I won't let her win." A slow smile spread across Lucas's face. "That's what I was hoping you'd say." He leaned in, his voice dropping. "I know a few things about Victoria. Things that could ruin her." Hope flared in my chest for the first time in days. Victoria had thought she won. But she had underestimated me. And she had definitely underestimated her ex-husband. This fight was far from over. Lucas leaned back in his chair, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness. His sharp eyes studied me as if measuring how far I was willing to go. The cafe around us hummed with quiet conversation, the occasional clatter of cups breaking the stillness. "You're sure you're ready for this?" he asked finally, setting his spoon aside. I met his gaze without hesitation. I don't have a choice. Victoria took everything. If there's a way to expose her, I want to know it. He smirked, almost as if he found my determination amusing. Good. Because this isn't just about money, sweetheart. Victoria has a lot of skeletons in her closet. I leaned forward. Like what? Lucas exhaled, rubbing his jaw. For starters, she's no stranger to legal manipulation. When we were married, I saw how she operated. Bribing, blackmailing, forging documents. She didn't just take Matthew's estate by accident. She planned this. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I had always known Victoria was cruel, but this was something else. How do we prove it? I asked, gripping the edge of the table. Lucas's smirk widened. Oh, we'll get there. But first, let's dig into her past. Lucas was meticulous. Over the next few days, he compiled everything he could find on Victoria. Business dealings, old financial records, past legal disputes. What we discovered made my stomach churn. Victoria had a pattern. She had always found ways to take what she wanted, leaving destruction in her wake. There was an old fraud case buried in sealed records from years ago. She had once taken control of a family inheritance, not hers, by manipulating legal documents, much like she had done with Matthew's estate. She should have been in prison, I murmured, flipping through the papers Lucas had printed out. How did she get away with all of this? She's careful, Lucas admitted. And ruthless. He tapped a highlighted section on one of the pages. But even the best make mistakes. My heart pounded as I read the words. Undeclared financial transactions. Wire transfers from offshore accounts. Lucas leaned closer. This means she's been hiding money. Money she didn't want anyone to know about. A slow realization crept over me. If we can prove she was siphoning funds while handling Matthew's estate, then we can unravel everything, Lucas finished. I swallowed, nerves twisting in my stomach. We had the thread. Now we just had to pull. But there was still one pressing question. What happened to Matthew's real will? If Victoria had forged or destroyed it, there had to be evidence somewhere. One name kept surfacing. Robert Hayes, the lawyer who had handled the estate transfer. I don't trust him, I admitted. When I confronted him, he looked nervous. Lucas nodded. He's hiding something. And I have a feeling he's not doing it for free. The plan was simple. Catch Hayes off guard, pressure him into revealing the truth. I took a deep breath as we stepped into his law office. My palms were sweaty, my pulse quick. The receptionist greeted us stiffly, glancing between Lucas and me. Do you have an appointment? We won't take much of his time, Lucas said smoothly, flashing a practiced lawyer's smile. She hesitated before disappearing into the back. Moments later, Hayes emerged, his suit crisp but his face tense. I already told you there is no updated will. Lucas leaned against the desk, crossing his arms. And yet we both know that's a lie. Hayes stiffened. We're not here to play games, I said firmly. I know Victoria got to you. I know she paid you to make Matthew's will disappear. His jaw clenched. You can't prove that. Lucas smiled. Not yet. But here's the thing. If we do prove it, you'll go down with her. A bead of sweat trickled down Hayes's temple. He looked over his shoulder, lowering his voice. You don't understand. She owns people. If I talk, I lose everything. My hands curled into fists. You mean like how she took everything from me? Hayes hesitated. His gaze darted around the office, as if the walls themselves were listening. Finally, he exhaled sharply. I don't have the original will anymore. But, he hesitated, then pulled a folder from his drawer. This is all I have left. I grabbed it, flipping it open. Inside was a copy, a scanned version of Matthew's real will. I choked back a gasp. There, in black and white, was my name. Not Victoria's. She doesn't know I kept this, Hayes muttered. If she finds out. She won't, Lucas assured him. As long as you stay out of our way. Hayes swallowed hard, nodding. We had what we needed. Back in the car, I stared down at the document, my hands shaking. Lucas drove in silence before finally speaking. This is it. The proof that Victoria had no legal claim. I let out a shaky breath. She won't go down without a fight. Oh, I'm counting on it, Lucas said. The more she struggles, the harder she falls. I looked out the window as the city blurred past. Victoria had spent her life manipulating, stealing, and destroying people to get what she wanted. But this time she had gone too far. And she was about to pay for it. That night as I lay awake in the motel room I thought about my next move. Victoria thought she had one. She thought I would disappear quietly. But she underestimated me. She underestimated us. Lucas had a plan. One that would turn her own schemes against her. The missing will was only the beginning. Because now we weren't just taking back what was mine. We were about to dismantle everything she had built. And I was going to watch her world burn. I sat in the courthouse hallway, the cold wooden bench beneath me doing little to steady my nerves. The air smelled of old paper and faintly of coffee, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. The folder in my lap, the copy of Matthew's real will, felt like a weapon, a ticking bomb that would finally obliterate Victoria's web of lies. Lucas sat beside me calm as ever, scrolling through his notes. His confidence was reassuring, but my hands still trembled. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The heavy courtroom doors swung open and a clerk called my name. It's time. I stood on shaky legs, inhaled deeply and stepped forward. The courtroom was packed. Spectators filled the gallery, reporters whispered among themselves, and at the center of it all sat her. Victoria. She wore a pristine navy blue suit, her blonde hair pulled into a tight bun. To anyone else she looked composed, dignified. But I saw through it. The stiffness in her shoulders, the way her fingers tapped against the table. She was nervous. Good. Her lawyer, an older man with graying hair, shot me a glance before turning back to his client. Victoria leaned in, whispering furiously in his ear. Lucas nudged me. She's scared. I swallowed and nodded. She should be. The judge entered and the room fell silent. Court is now in session, the bailiff announced. I clenched my fists under the table. This was it. Lucas stood first, walking to the center of the room with the ease of someone who had done this 100 times before. He addressed the judge with crisp professionalism. Your Honor, today we bring forward evidence that the transfer of Matthew Carter's estate to Victoria Carter was fraudulent. We have a copy of the original will, which clearly names my client, his wife, as the rightful heir. Gasps murmured through the gallery. I kept my expression blank, but inside my heart pounded. Victoria's lawyer stood. Objection, Your Honor. We have no proof that this so-called will is legitimate. Lucas barely blinked. We anticipated that argument. He walked to our table, picking up a separate folder. We conducted an independent forensic analysis. The signature on this document is authentic, and records show that it was filed, but mysteriously vanished shortly after Matthew's death. The judge peered over his glasses. Vanished. Lucas nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And the person responsible for handling that document was none other than attorney Robert Hayes. All eyes turned to the other side of the courtroom. Victoria's face paled. The doors opened again and Robert Hayes stepped inside. He looked uneasy, adjusting his tie as he made his way to the witness stand. Victoria's lawyer immediately protested. Your Honor, Mr. Hayes has no relevant testimony. The judge held up a hand. I'll decide that. Mr. Hayes, you may proceed. Hayes cleared his throat, avoiding Victoria's glare. I handled the estate after Matthew Carter's passing, he began. At the time I was approached by Victoria Carter, who offered me financial compensation to ensure that this, he gestured to the folder Lucas held, never saw the light of day. A stunned silence filled the room. My nails dug into my palms. This was the moment Victoria's world unraveled. Victoria shot up from her seat. He's lying, she shrieked, her composure cracking. The judge slammed his gavel. Miss Carter, sit down. She did, but I could see the panic in her eyes. Lucas turned back to Hayes. And just to clarify, did you accept this compensation? Hayes swallowed. Yes. Murmurs rippled through the room. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. We had her. Victoria's lawyer scrambled, flipping through his papers, trying to salvage what was left. Your Honor, my client maintains that she was the rightful heir based on existing documentation. Lucas interrupted. Which was manipulated. He gestured toward Hayes. We have a witness who confessed under oath, proving fraud. Additionally, we've uncovered financial records showing that Victoria Carter siphoned funds from the estate for personal use. He turned to me. Would you like to explain what you found? I stood, my voice steady despite the adrenaline racing through my veins. Victoria Carter drained the estate accounts, funneling money into offshore accounts. She sold off my husband's assets, including his car, business shares, and personal items, all while leaving my son and me homeless. Gasps filled the room again. The judge nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I've heard enough. He turned to Victoria, who was now visibly shaking. Miss Carter, do you have anything to say for yourself? She opened her mouth, but no words came. She knew it was over. The judge picked up his gavel. Based on the presented evidence, this court finds that Victoria Carter acted fraudulently. The estate rightfully belongs to the legal heir, Mrs. Carter. The gavel struck. Case closed. The courtroom erupted. Some people cheered, others whispered in shock. I stood frozen for a moment, barely processing the victory. Then Lucas nudged me, grinning. Told you we'd win. I exhaled shakily. It was over. Victoria sat motionless, her face drained of color. She had lost. Everything she had stolen was being ripped from her grasp. And I had finally reclaimed what was mine. As I walked past her, she whispered, "You'll regret this." I paused, then met her gaze. "No, Victoria. You will." Then I walked out into the fresh air where my son was waiting. The storm had finally passed. As I stepped out of the courthouse, the weight that had pressed against my chest for months finally began to lift. The air felt fresher, the sky somehow brighter. The victory was real. I had won. My son Ethan sat on the courthouse steps, his small legs swinging as he waited. The moment he saw me, his eyes lit up. "Mommy." He ran toward me and I knelt down, catching him in my arms. I held him tightly, inhaling the soft scent of his hair, letting the moment sink in. We were free. Lucas stepped beside me, hands in his pockets, his usual smirk in place. "Not bad, huh?" I looked up at him, still breathless from the rush of it all. "Not bad." I let out a soft laugh, shaking my head. "You helped me take down a monster." His smirk deepened. "Well, I do love a good downfall. Especially when it involves my ex-wife." For the first time in months, I smiled. Really smiled. Victoria was ruined. Watching her fall. As we walked to the parking lot, I noticed a figure standing near a black car. Victoria. She was a mess. The woman who once held her head high, who smirked at my pain, now looked like a ghost of herself. Her perfectly pressed suit was wrinkled, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. She wasn't the queen anymore. I stopped in my tracks, meeting her gaze across the lot. She took a step toward me, her expression twisted with something I couldn't quite place. Anger, desperation, disbelief. "You think this is over?" Her voice was hoarse, but the venom remained. Lucas let out a low chuckle beside me. "Oh, I'm very sure it is." Victoria ignored him, her eyes locked onto mine. "You took everything from me." I tilted my head. "You mean the things you stole?" Her breath hitched, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind her rage, fear. He knew. She knew this was just the beginning of her downfall. I stepped forward, my voice calm but firm. "You did this to yourself, Victoria. You destroyed your own life." She swallowed hard, glancing away. For the first time she had nothing to say. And that was the real victory. A new home, a fresh start. The next week was a whirlwind. The house was mine again. The legal process moved fast now that Victoria was out of the picture. I walked through the front door, the familiar scent of home wrapping around me like a long-lost embrace. Ethan ran through the house, his laughter filling the empty space. It had been too long since I'd heard that sound. I ran my fingers over the furniture, the walls, the memories that Victoria had tried to steal. But she hadn't won. I had. That night, I stood on the balcony watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The weight of everything, the loss, the fight, the victory, settled over me. I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming my life. Ethan clutched my hand as we walked into his school the next morning. "Mommy, does this mean we don't have to move again?" His voice was small, hopeful. I knelt beside him, brushing his curls away from his face. "That's exactly what it means, baby. We're home now. For good." His eyes shone with relief and he threw his arms around my neck. "I love you, Mommy." Tears burned my eyes, but they were different now. Not from pain but from peace. Victoria had tried to take everything from us. But she had failed. Ethan's future was safe. And that was all that mattered. Later that evening I met Lucas at a quiet bar. He ordered a whiskey, I got a glass of wine. "To your victory," he said, raising his glass. I clinked mine against his. Our victory. He smirked. You're stronger than you think, you know. I exhaled, letting the words settle over me. I didn't think I had it in me. But now, I know better. He nodded, taking a sip of his drink. What now? I looked out the window, the city stretching beyond us. Now I live. For myself. For Ethan. Lucas studied me for a moment, then smiled. I think you'll do just fine. And for the first time in a long time, I believed him. Closure and moving forward. That night, I returned home and stood in front of the mirror. The woman staring back at me was different. Stronger. Wiser. Unbreakable. I had fought for my family, my son, my future. And I had won. Victoria had taken her best shot. But I was still standing. And I always would be.